3 years ago, protagonists had possessed a game character, and the name of that game was Heroic Legend of Arhen. This game was all about various kinds of dangerous events that went on in an academy and its endless incidents, where in the finale the only thing that was waiting for them was the end of the world by an army of the undead. The story was of a very large scale. However, the protagonist was not worried about it at all because he was certain that the main character of this story would take care of everything. As for him, he was just an extra anyway, and his name was Corinlock. He was a level 1 typical NPC villager in one of the beginner quests where the main character was going to save the village. He walked through medieval town without any care in the world, thinking that everything would be resolved as long as the story went as the game went. So with that out of the way, he decided to go and see the main character, Park Sihu, who was going to become famous and rich soon enough in this world. But just then, he saw another guy sitting there, and he was talking about Sprite, which immediately caught his attention because he knew very well that there wasn't Sprite in this game at all. Suddenly, that guy started yelling that he wanted to live for his own sake only and that with efficiency. All of a sudden, Corinlock took his hand and excitedly told him that he was just like him. It turned out that this dude was none other than Park Siu himself, the main character of this game, and he was also just a regular person possessing a game character. However, as Park Siu began to slay monsters without breaking a sweat, the difference between the two of them became much more visible, and that was, he had the privilege that was given to player characters, a stat window. But the problem was that Siu had never played this game before, so he had no idea what he was supposed to do with this stat window. That was where Corinlock came in, and he advised him that since he was planning to become a mage, he should first go with intelligence stats, and then there was going to be a skill book in the next story, which was also really important. The reason he knew all this was because this guy had played all the stories and all the possible routes that were in this game. So basically, he was a pro at Heroic Legend of Arhan, and for Siu, he was actually an amazing advantage to have by his side. In the middle of their conversation, a monster tried to attack Corinlock from behind. However, Siu acted as his shield and took down the monster with magic. The two of them started working together as a team, taking down monsters with ease. Corinlock had all the information about this world, while Siu had the stat window and the player system. The two of them became a great duo, and with the main character himself by his side, he began to believe that they could save a lot of people and actually stop the world from ending so that, in the end, they could return back to Earth. After they defeated the monsters, Siu gave him a low-class elixir to recover his strength, and even though he was curious to know how he got that, he was thankful for it. However, as he was drinking it, he thought to himself that there was one thing that made him very disappointed, and that was every single member of his party was a male. Originally, this game's charm was that it contained fantasy action as well as diverse heroines and dating simulator features, but Sivu did not want to get involved with any women, and he only put them in his party when it was necessary. So in the end, they just ended up with a party full of men, and he was not particularly happy about it. However, that was not it. Later down the line, all of a sudden, the Sword Emperor's granddaughter died on the way to the entrance ceremony, and the final boss of the first stage, Mariette, went missing. The plot had started to stray from the original storyline of the game, and to top it all off, the way Park Sihu thought because of his real personality, something was clearly not right, and Corinlock did not realize that at that time. The final boss of the first stage, Mariette Dunalef, was one of this game's heroines. However, neither Siu nor he was able to meet her because she went missing. But then, after some time passes since that incident, he found her staff inside Siu's secret bunker. He had followed him because he was sneaking out at night for a while now, but he had never thought he had such a big place hidden underground. It was like his personal inventory where he had stored tons of important artifacts. One of them was Odachi, a sword that had also gone missing when another heroine, Alicia, disappeared. Every single item that was present in that room was an item belonging to a character that had gone missing as they both progressed in the game. But that was not it. He was even more shocked to see that Mariette Dunalef was being kept there as a prisoner, locked in chains. Before he could even comprehend all this, Siu appeared behind him and questioned him about why he was there. Corinlock demanded an explanation for all this as he recalled that Siu had told him he lost Mariette when he went after her. But Siu responded that she was just a demon, and he did not want to waste an elder-class vampire's blood when instead he could use it efficiently for himself. He also told Corinlock that he had also drunk quite a bit of it too, and at that moment he realized what that low-class elixir back then really was. He felt sick down to his stomach, and as he kneeled on the floor, Siu simply asked him what the problem was as he had worked really hard to capture her, even holding up for a month in the forest with a trap. Corinlock wanted to know why he did all this, and he answered that it was all in order to efficiently progress with the story. He found his so-called advisor's route way too frustrating because he was taking losses again and again from trying to save people. He was not killing those annoying beings like Jaeger and Lark, and he kept on trying to protect people who they could not even manipulate without upping their friendship level. So he reached the conclusion that using them all like this was, in fact, the most efficient way, and even claimed that he was better at this game than Corinlock. Corinlock understood now that this man had been lying to him from the very start, and that he was not a newbie at all. Not knowing what to say anymore, he asked him how many people he had killed till now, and without any hesitation he answered that if he could get 3 more kills, it would be 100,000. Realizing that he was not even human, but just a monster, Corinlock became enraged and grabbed him by his collar, but Siu did not even flinch and told him that they were all just mere NPCs anyway, and he had killed plenty of them as well. Cornlock yelled that the ones he was killing were evil monsters who did not deserve to be saved because they were trying to end the whole world. Annoyed by how he always kept on repeating the word efficiency, he questioned him if he was so obsessed with it from the beginning, then why did he take Odachi when there was no sense for a mage to take a hidden artifact meant for a knight? He also pointed out that there was absolutely nothing wrong with a regular elixir, which he could make very easily through the stat screen alone. The fact that he did all this inefficient work to create this farm was proof that he just needed a sandbag for his sociopathic tendencies. Those words enraged Siu, and he quickly attacked him. As Cornlock was on the verge of passing out, Siu walked up to him and told him that he should not be talking to him like that after everything he had done for him. Menacingly, he looked him in the eye and stated that he wanted him to think of him as his everything, as his world, because he clearly did not understand his place in this world. All he did was either always stick his nose into everyone's business or stare at other women. Seeing the look on his face, Cornlock was terrified, and he had no idea what Siu was trying to say anymore. He nervously crawled back, yelling that he was not supposed to be this kind of character, and asked why he was suddenly trying to change the entire genre of this game when they had been together for 199 chapters. Siu responded that he had removed everything that could get in his way until now, also that he could secure a future for the two of them. That was also one of the reasons why he only put guys in their party. However, they were just for looking anyway because the only one he really loved was Cornlock. This freaky isn't normal. Thank God this story is not BL. MC was absolutely terrified, and out of instinct, he punched Siu right in the face. He tried to run away to save his life, thinking that he never even got to have a girlfriend before. However, Siu's magical vines stopped him in his tracks and trapped him. He closed in on him and once again told him that he was going to trap him forever because in this fake world, Cornlock was the only real thing that existed for him. Cornlock started crying and begged him to stop, while Siu, as he was casting a spell, stated that everything was going to be over soon, and once this was all over, they were going to be together forever. The next moment he opened his eyes, he found himself beneath the stars in the middle of an ocean. It was a separate plane that Park Siu had made just to keep him trapped. A notification appears stating that the last stage was opening, and he understood that it only meant one thing. Siu was going up against the final boss to end the game. Since he had been killing everything on his own for a while now, Cornlock was certain he would win against the final boss as well, and it only made him more worried because he had no idea what was going to happen to him after that. However, all of a sudden, another message came up stating that the challenge had failed because the player had died, which left him completely stunned and speechless. And so we come back to the present time. MC woke up in his bed, and only when he looked outside the window did he realize that he had actually been teleported back in time, back to 3 years ago. To the first day when he came there, he clenched his fists, and with tears streaming down his face, he was determined to kill the freaky main character in this timeline and put a stop to him once and for all. As time went on, there was an incident at the Roshan River flooding, where during the water monster subjugation quest, the dam broke, and an entire village was swept away along with it. 1,000 water monsters and thousands of people from that town drowned that day. However, even at such a horrendous scene, Park Siku seemed to be enjoying it a lot. Previously, Cornlock simply could not understand why he was smiling like that, so he decided not to think about it too much. But now that he knew what Siu truly was, he understood very well that even if countless people were dying, he only saw his own profit in it. The chance to monopolize EXP. He still felt haunted by remembering how Siu had killed almost 100,000 people like a pure devil, but nonetheless he was not going to back down and wanted to stop him. Since they had started just recently, they were both equals at rank 5, and all the factors that strengthened the main player were mainly centered at Merkaba Academy. And after entering that academy was when Park Sihu began to get a whole lot stronger. He was not a monster as of yet, but still, there was no telling how quickly he would become stronger after he joined that academy. With that thought in mind, Cornlock rushed into a forest. Since the entrance ceremony of the academy was going to take place in just 5 days, the only chance to kill him was right now, and to do that, he grabbed some mushrooms from that forest. Later on, a tutorial quest had begun where a carriage on its way to Merkaba City broke down in a monster-infested forest, and the player was needed to protect those people along with the security guards until it was fixed. So Siu proceeded to do so and help the two knights, Leon and Laura, who even praised him, saying that he was quite skilled. He appreciated that. A man then informed the two knights that the carriage had been fixed, so it was time for them to get going now. But then, all of a sudden, they heard a loud roar from the forest, and when they looked back, there was a wooden log coming right at them. Liam quickly pushed Laura out of the way, and he himself barely dodged it. They both got back up, and they knew exactly that these crying sounds belonged to the werewolf, which was a rank 2 monster. It appeared in front of them and once again let out a loud roar. Cornlock also arrived there. However, he was a bit late, even though he ran there as soon as this quest had started. If only he had reached there early and had some time to prepare, he could have saved those knights. But now the werewolf was taking them out, starting with Laura. Leon instructed Siu to quickly get on the carriage and escape while he stayed behind to buy them some time. However, Siu refused and asked the driver to go ahead without him. There was a girl in the carriage who tried to stop him, but he argued that he could not abandon Leon and just run away. But then, before he even realized it, the werewolf came right in front of him, holding Leon by his neck. He stood frozen in place while Korenlock, who was watching from afar, wanted to confirm before interfering whether this Park Sihu was actually the hero who was going to save this world, or if he was just a possessed player once again like him. Siu felt a bit scared seeing such a huge monster in front of him. But then suddenly, the female warrior who was in the carriage jumped out and struck the werewolf with her sword, took her shock and managed to block her attack, and she quickly took a step back. She told Siu to stay behind as she was going to handle this creature by herself. This girl was none other than the second daughter of the Arden family, who possessed Odachi, one of the 6 King's swords. She was the most influential party member and also a named character, Alicia Arden. Siu proceeded to bring out a knife and stabbed her in the back with it, leaving Korenlock stunned as he realized that it was the same Sihu after all. Confused, Alicia questioned him why he was doing this, but then she started feeling dizzy as if she had been poisoned. Siu smiled at her and said that his hand simply slipped because he was too nervous. The werewolf was also still there and tried to attack her, but she managed to block it. Meanwhile, Korenlock recalled that if Alicia were to die right here, then Siu was going to get his hands on Odachi. And then, after that, he would be able to join Lunia Arden's party, who was a great swordsman. Seeing that even though she was poisoned, she was able to hold her own against the werewolf, Siu wondered if it was because she was a named NPC. But the effects of the poison started to become more visible as she tried to calm herself down. She closed her eyes to focus and then activated her perfect footwork skill. As the werewolf once again charged at her to attack, she was ready to land a finishing strike. Seeing that, Situ began to worry that she just might as well kill the werewolf alone. And since he could not let that happen, he aimed the poison knife at her and threw it toward her. She managed to block the knife using her sword, but that split second was all that the werewolf needed. And even though she was able to counter it and stab the werewolf in the neck using her sword, it also got the better of her and landed a fatal blow with its fangs. With a trembling voice, she once again questioned Siu why he did all this, but he simply ignored her and finally took the Odaki from her. He understood that this gear was only usable with a specific skill, but he was not really worried about that and decided to think about it later. However, before leaving, he looked at her and remembered that killing an NPC would also bring EXP. As she lay on the ground, her vision fading away, all she could see was a demon looking at her. All of a sudden, Siu got hit by a small sack bomb and a weird powder came out of it, covering his entire face. He had no idea what it was, and enraged, he started yelling, demanding that whoever threw this at him must come out. Suddenly, a bunch of rat-like monsters came charging toward him. Turns out that the topanic mushrooms Korenlock had collected earlier were the favorite food of forest monsters, and the powder he just threw at Siu was made from the same mushrooms. So in the eyes of the forest monsters right now, he was nothing but fresh meat marinated in some tasty powder. The monsters jumped up on him, and while he was busy fighting them, Korenlock tried to take Alicia Arden away from there, who still seemed to be alive. He then looked at the corpse of the werewolf that Alicia had just defeated, and he took out its fang using his knife. Suddenly, Stu came up right behind him. As he pointed his sword at him, he questioned him about who he was. Seeing that Sihu had killed 3 horn rats in simply 1 minute, Korenlock stated that it must be great to have a gachi. Siu knew that voice completely well, and he was shocked to see that the person in front of him was actually Korenlock. He inquired from him how he got there, but he simply smirks and says to him that he could cut his hand off if he continued to hold the sword like that. Siu gets confused and takes a look at the sword, which was exactly what he wanted, and while he was distracted, Korenlock quickly throws sand in his eye to stun. Not being able to see properly, he starts swinging his sword blindly, and even though he was clumsy with it, he was definitely quick. He knew very well that Siu was still way better than him physically, so he did not really have a choice but to push himself. Holding the fang that he just took from the werewolf, he used it as a weapon and tried to attack him, but he managed to dodge it at the last second. The thought of having this fang rammed into his neck and being killed scared him, and it was clearly visible on his face. He started focusing all his attention on that fang and played on defense to avoid being hit to the point that he saw nothing but this fang, and that was exactly what Korenlock wanted. He brings out his knife that he was hiding in his pocket and he stabs him in the shoulder. Siu screamed in pain, but he was not going to stop there as he tried to finish him off using the fang. However, he stops it right in time, inches away before it could reach his throat by sacrificing his hand. But still, that was not enough, and after not being able to hold it for long, the fangs finally pierced his throat. Korenlock thanks him for the past life, and with his hands trembling, he admits that he was able to get stronger thanks to him. Even so, he had no regrets about this moment because he knew for a fact that he had just killed the seed of a monster. All of a sudden, the whole game system faces an error since the main character, Park Sihu, had died, and the system begins some calculations to replace him by examining the characters in the proximity. After examining things like Korenlock's potential ideology, compatibility, and player log, the system declared him the new main character, passing the previous player's EXP down to him and beginning the succession of the new sub-player. The title that he now carried was Triple A Class Knight, Martial Master's successor, sub-player. After getting that message from the system, he wondered if it meant that he was finally getting a stat window for himself. But more importantly, he shifts his attention back to Alicia Arden, who was still on the ground, breathing heavily. He quickly picks her up and asks if she was okay, but she was not, and she was not even able to see clearly. He confirms from her if she was feeling dizzy, could not smell, and her ears were ringing as well, and those were actually the symptoms she was having. Judging from all that, plus her twisted tongue, he understood that it was probably the peacock tree frog's poison. At the point of the tutorial, this poison was hard to create without a combination window, and if it would have had a slightly higher combination level, she would have died immediately. Luckily, it was not, but still, the fang was stuck in her body, and she was very much in danger. He needed to stop the bleeding and detox her, so he uses his belt and straps it tightly near her wound, assuring her that he was actually a master at stopping bleeding and detoxification. There was a chance that she could bite her own tongue during this whole process, which was a huge problem, so he tried to find something that she could bite on. His eyes then turned towards Sue's corpse and give her his hand and just bite on it as hard as she could because what he was about to do was going to hurt a lot. As he started pulling out the fang, he thought to himself that even though he did not know why he traveled 3 years back in time, he still returned and had killed a player. The person who died in his previous life was alive right now in front of him, and he was actually the one saving her. As he took out the fang, her muffled scream echoed in the entire area, and as she quickly went to sleep, seeing that he saved a person, he thought that maybe that was enough for a reason. Later, when she wakes up, he informs her that he was making an antidote for her and also assures her she did not need to worry since people don't die so easily. With her eyes still closed, she asks him for his name, but he simply puts a towel on her head and says that she did not need to know who he was. He suggests she just go back to sleep and get some rest while thinking that it was better to have as many people in the dark about his actions as possible. He starts going through the entire situation that he was now in and goes over the main premise that this story had. The story of Heroic Legend of Arhen, as the name said, was a story about the hero. While solving the incidents and accidents that occurred at the academy, the main character becomes the hero, who would rescue this whole world by taking down countless villains and the final boss at the end. The only reason why the devil like Park Sihu even went along with the story for so long was because if the final boss was not defeated at the end, this whole world would end. However, he had killed that player, so he now needed to understand who was going to fulfill that role. Being the sub-player, Martial Master's successor, he was ready to take up that role. However, the thing that was getting on his nerves was that even though the system chose him and made him a sub-player, he still could not use any of the player's convenient devices or stat screens at all. He even got excited to see that he had the stat window, but in the end, it was still the same, and he could not access it. And it wasn't really easy to be the backup for something he did not know about with just the future memories he came to know during his past life. He needed to use the factors that were available external to the system. For 3 years, he had trained himself to his limits, so he was not a normal possessor or an extra anymore. He had learned a few tricks of his own and was able to create a small fireball out of thin air without breaking a sweat. In his past life, he was quite desperate to survive as well. So as someone who was up for magic, he started learning about runes. Runes were ancient letters that contained magical powers of their own. Dubi, Restraint, Oath, known as the runes of the 3 commandments. These were some of the most powerful laws of this world, which were also the source of superhuman strength and the cause of destruction. Remembering all that, he decides to inscribe all 3 of those onto his body, and he used his own blood to do that. The first one that he drew was the Rune of Duty. This commandment granted the caster some extra powers when honoring a self-imposed oath. One could keep doing stable and simple duties, like for example, not eating chicken. However, since they were very easy to adhere to, they would barely earn any stats from them. It was like high risk, high reward. So, although it was pretty demanding, he understood that he needed to make some big promises that he would have to follow until the end. So he vowed that he would never turn a blind eye to the misfortunes of good people, and the rune on his arm began to ignite. His duty was sealed, and his status was going to rise from now on whenever he cleared a quest, and failure to do so was going to increase a penalty of 10. The second one was restraint, and the one he put up on himself was that he could not perceive spirits. In this world, everything had a spiritual feeling to it, and astral beings like ghosts and spirits, which did not have any material bodies, also existed here. Since astral beings could only get involved upon mutual recognition, they could not use any of their powers on unconscious people and those without spiritual feelings. With this restraint, his hit ratio from astral beings became 0%, and his hit ratio from physical beings turned to 50%. Disobeying the bind was going to result in him receiving 600% damage against all subjects as opponents. This penalty of astral beings not being able to meddle with him had become like a protective shield that was going to guard him from all astral beings in this world, good or bad. And then we reached the last one. Oath. Using the weight of the oath, this commandment carried a great risk, and that was the reason why neither he nor Park Sihu used it in his previous life. But seeing that even Park Sihu, who used everything that the system provided him, failed in the end, it was clear that he needed to use this as well if he wanted to clear the end. He takes up the oath with the most weight to it, and that was, he would save this world. After taking an oath that literally sought the greatest ambition, the commandments were complete, and his heart was now tied up in it, signaling that they were now applied to him, and if in any case he failed to uphold this oath, it would result in inevitable death as he was now bound to it. Later, Alicia woke up in a bed and quickly tried to get up, but then the nurse came in and asked her if she was feeling well now. She had no idea where she was, so the nurse informed her that she was actually in Merkabah City's emergency hospital. She wanted to know where the person who had brought her there was, but the nurse told her that he had just left. Since she could not move just yet, she started looking around to see where her stuff was, and then beside her bed, there was a bag, and it had Cornlock's belt that he had strapped around her wound. She remembered that it belonged to him, and as she picked it up, she noticed there was still blood on it. With a determined look on her face, she called out to the nurse, making her a bit nervous, but then went on to ask her if there was a place that sold honey bomb candy. The nurse just stood there confused, telling her that she could only have stew for now. Meanwhile, it had now been 3 days after the tutorial quest, and the day of Merkaba Academy's entrance ceremony was finally here. Cornlock checked his wallet in hopes of finding his student ID, which he needed to enter, but instead, he found a letter that he did not remember putting in. He opened it up, and it turned out the letter was from his family in this world, and it said that they were really proud of him. They wished for him to become a wonderful man who protected innocent people like those who were by his side as great protectors. Thinking about his life in this world, he was just a normal, incompetent child, but even still, he had a family. When he first possessed this body, he used to act awkwardly and unfamiliar with them. However, they treated him as family without change. And that's how he slowly began to love his family and this world a lot. That alone was one of the major differences between him and Park Sihu, and he felt lucky to have them. Later, inside Merkaba Academy, everyone present there seemed very confused and wondered why there were so many trains in there. But then a girl welcomed all the new students and requested them to gather around her. Cornlock introduced himself to her, and she was quite impressed to see how tall he was. With a bright smile on her face, she went on to offer him a potato out of nowhere, which left him a bit confused. After everyone got settled inside the train, she began giving them all a tour of the entire academy, starting off with the creation building, where magic students used to gather and conduct their research. It is then revealed that this lady was actually none other than Mariette Dunelef herself. She was a first-class, second-year Merkaba Academy mage who received the blessings of everyone and walked the broad and level road. As life went on, people of this world were going to experience a lot of unpredictable misfortunes and tragedies, and there were depths of despair that were going to happen to Mariette Dunelef. Sadly, it needed to happen to her because she was, in fact, the first act's final boss. After finishing the tour, she requested everyone to take one potato and one sweet potato each as they got off the train. After dropping them off, she took her leave and wished them all the best of luck. As everyone entered the hall of Merkaba Academy, Cornlock quickly noticed that the space expansion magic was starting, while everyone around him had no idea what was going on and simply panicked. Suddenly, someone yelled at them, saying that the new cadets of this academy should not be taken aback by something like this. Once again, while everyone was getting scared, Cornlock did not even flinch. He already knew that this was Old Man Hamon's voice, since his pattern was always pretty much the same. He was basically running a boot camp at this point. In this world, the population had a history of battle against the evil tribe, and the most effective weapon against the evil tribe was superhumans who were able to use aura and mana. The place that developed those superhumans was the Guardian Academy Merkaba. And so here we were, as Fermac Damon, the Night Faculty Professor, introduced himself to everyone, as he was in charge of the new students' welcome ceremony this year. Cornlock, on the other hand, was simply enjoying the show, as it had been a while since he had seen him. As the professor went on with his speech about how each one of them was there to either become a knight or a mage, he also felt that it was annoying to act like they were all that when, in reality, they were probably just some average kids. So first off, he wanted to see their abilities, and then a screen opened up in front of them, showing their overall stats. Cornlock wasn't really happy to see where his stats stood, but he found his physical stats to be a bit appealing. Professor Fermac further instructed them to stand in front of the number that matched their overall rank number, and since Cornlock's overall rank was 6, he stood in that row. Since there was a cap of 400 people, he realized that he was actually in the bottom 1%. With that out of the way, the professor smirked and wished them the best of luck for their battles. The higher-ups of the academy started analyzing the students and commented that this year's students had a lot of diamonds in the rough. However, one of the ladies did not want to measure the students just yet purely based on their ranks, as she wanted to wait until they were finished assessing all the other students. Having an overall rank of 2, there was the granddaughter of the sword genius Alicia Arden, Avalon's druid Yule, mercenary of the sword control Dron Warski, and the golem sorcerer Kranoludin. The only student who had an overall rank of 1 was the heavenly Yaksha Horan. Seeing that a child like her was enrolled this year, the lady seemed stressed and wondered what the director was thinking. Another man then commented that there didn't seem to be any point in testing the 6th ranks because, to begin with, even the 5th ranks were not looking particularly great, and he even went as far as to suggest that they should just throw the 6th rankers out. However, the lady got offended and reminded him that the director wanted all the students to walk the path of learning. Feeling scared himself, the man did not argue and proceeded to begin the next exercise. A weapon case fell in front of Cornlock, and the students were informed that in 30 seconds, monsters were going to swarm that place, and they were required to deal with as many as they could. So basically, it was a test that put them into a place with nothing but monsters, and made them fight them based on their level. As the countdown began, he opened his weapon case to pick a weapon. In his mind, he already knew from experience that most 5th and 6th ranked students probably would not even be able to think clearly at this moment, and they would just grab whatever they could, most likely a sword, because that's what he did in his last life as well. Monsters started to appear in the arena, and they were 5th-ranked monsters named Short Hounds. Cornlock chose his weapon while remembering that there was a saying. It takes 100 days to use a spear, 1,000 days for a blade, and 10,000 days for a sword. So with that in mind, he picked up a spear and threw it right at the monsters, instantly taking one of them out. As the other 2 hounds charged towards him, they were also taken out by the spear in the blink of an eye. and it became very clear that Cornlock had way too much experience in how to kill these hounds. He cleared out the first wave in a matter of 12 seconds, whereas in his previous life he could not even kill these short hounds and had gotten eliminated quickly. However, this time was different, and with this spear in his hand, he awaited the next wave and was ready to kill them all until he could face the top-ranked monster. But then, a few moments later, even though he hit the 5-minute mark, nothing was coming out, and he began to wonder if the system was broken or something. Meanwhile, on the outside, the man who was overseeing this whole test was simply disappointed to see so many students being scared and getting eliminated by these low-level creatures, where back in his day, he could kill these 5th-ranked monsters in just 1 minute and 22 seconds. Seeing that even the 5th-ranked students were not able to defeat them, he still believed there was simply no point in even looking at the 6th ranks. But then he noticed Cornlock just sitting there and yawning, and he simply assumed that there must have been a bug due to which the monsters did not get summoned for him. So he sends the same wolves once again, and even Cornlock was confused, seeing that the next rank monsters did not come out but just the same hounds again. While the teacher quickly went on to see other students, he once again took them out in an instant. Finally, there was the first passer who took 7 minutes and 20 seconds. He then once again takes a look at the 5th and 6th ranked students and sees that Cornlock was again just casually sitting there. He was convinced that the monster summoner must be malfunctioning, but then another man comes up to him and states that Madame Josephine's test magic had never made a mistake in 20 years. He questions him if he had even seen the monsters not getting summoned or if he was just assuming all this. Of course, he had not seen it himself, but he was still hell-bent on believing that it must be a bug and summon those hounds again. As the hounds appear in front of Cornlock once again, he got really annoyed, seeing that the same monsters kept on coming. He takes out his spear, multiplies it into 3 spears, and throws them at the monsters, taking out all 3 of them in one shot in merely 7.3 seconds. Both men were completely stunned after seeing what he just did, and they quickly called out Professor Firmak to come and check him out. They asked him what was the fastest record for the 3rd and 4th rank that he was in charge of, and he answers that there was this kid named Jager who held the record for 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The teacher became even more surprised, and seeing how good he was at throwing the spear, he guessed that he must be the son of a hunter. He then proceeds to summon a Matboar, which was a 4th rank monster, 1 rank higher than the previous hounds, to see what he was capable of. However, he was yet again shocked to see that the boar was taken out in mere 3.7 seconds. He then steps up the game and summons a 3rd rank monster, an owl bear. The creature immediately starts attacking him, but Cornlock quickly dodges it and stabs it with his spear. However, the owl bear did not even feel a thing, and he continued trying to attack him. Since that did not work, he then uses his magic spell and sets the monster up in flames. Everyone on the outside was shocked to see that he was using rune magic, and even Professor Firmak started getting intrigued. It appeared that fire also did not seem to have much effect on it, but since it was keeping its vision blocked, that was all that he needed as he struck it from above and landed the spear right in its skull. The teachers outside realized that he was definitely not a mere 6th rank, but they could not really test him any further than that, as the monster test was made to only go up to the 3rd rank. They felt that an interesting student had appeared for the first time in a long time and looked forward to seeing how he was going to fight the evil spirits in the next part of this test. They began with the 5th rank evil spirit test, and he could feel that something had definitely been summoned in front of him. However, he could not see or hear it because of the restraint penalty that he had. Due to that, he could not sense or interfere with souls, ghosts, or spirits whatsoever. He decides to wait for a while to check if this restraint was actually working as it said, and then after a minute of just standing there, it was confirmed that it was for sure activated. So since he had confirmed everything he wanted to confirm in this part of the test, he simply raises his hand and announces that he wanted to give up. As the final result of his test appeared, he was disqualified from the entire evil spirit test, while as for the monster test, he had set a new record for defeating all 3 monsters. As he came out from the test, the teacher just looked at him and wondered what exactly he was. After the test was finished, everyone was discussing among themselves about what rank they got and how many creatures they defeated. But there was one student who stood out, and his name was Jager Hinchpier. Cornlock remembered who he was because this guy was the same kid who had started a fight with the player at the beginning of the story in his past life, and Park Sihu simply killed him because he got pissed off. He agreed that he was a lunatic, arrogant, and a bit of a delinquent, but he also understood that it was common for his age. Other students then start making fun of the 5th ranked since they even lost to creatures like short hounds and ghosts, but there was one boy whom Cornlock recognized, and his name was Lark. He remembered that in his previous life he could not get over his inferiority complex, but because he used to speak ill of Sihu and him, he also received the same fate as Jager at the hands of the player. Just then, the director of the academy, Arya Kusar, comes up on the stage and he begins his speech about how each one of them had entered this academy in order to become strong. Some of them had enough strength, while some still had a long way to go, and although he could not guarantee that they would get what they wanted from this place, he hoped that they all would be able to find their own path in this place, because he was there to help them take their first step. But after that, the only thing that mattered was their motivations. So with that said, he wishes them a great day and takes his leave. As the students tried to get to know each other, Jager yelled that from today, he was the 3rd rank knight. But then he notices Lark sitting in a corner and goes up to him. He questions him about what rank he was, and Lark answers that he was a 5th rank. Hearing that, he started bullying him and called him pathetic for not being able to kill even the short hounds. Just then, Cordenlock comes up behind him and breaks the tension by acting like he wanted to be his friend. He even praises the blood tattoo that was on the back of his neck, and he knew that it meant to show what his blood type was so that he could quickly get a transfusion if he ever got hurt. Jager was actually impressed and was happy to see that he knew exactly what it meant and explained that his mom, who was a tattoo artist, did this for him. Cordenlock also expressed that it was very nice and wanted to know if he had tattoos anywhere else as well when, in reality, he already knew about all of this. Turns out that in the previous life, when Jager went missing, his mother came to the academy and explained to them that his tattoos were not just for show, but something that she did out of worry for her son, who had entered this academy as a loving parent. While he was proudly showing all of his tattoos, Cordenlock goes ahead to introduce himself, and just as it seemed like they were turning into friends, he involves Lark as well, and they all just laugh together, creating their own little group. Meanwhile, Alicia was looking at him from afar, and she found him really amazing, as he was able to save that little kid who was getting bullied so naturally. In her eyes, he seemed like a good person. But on the other hand, he was thinking to himself that now that he had left a good first impression on Lark, he would be able to use his ability, Memorize, which meant that he had now obtained a free skill book in the form of Lark, and he started grinning like a maniac. In Merkaba Academy, most of the facilities were provided to the students free of charge. Student cafeterias were relatively cheaper than outside, and the student dorms were also free. But one thing that stood out in this academy and was the most recommended facility was the training rooms. As for why, the reason was pretty simple. It was a place where even an impossible training could become possible. And of course, Cordenlock had already started using it to prepare himself for fighting the spirit bodies that were invisible to him. As he was training, some seniors were observing him, and they talked about how usually students practice with spirit bodies in the second semester, and even then, they could not even catch the wind-type spirit bodies. Mariette Dunalef was also there, and she just observed him quietly from behind. Just as he was getting the hang of it, he got hit by the spirit body, and he began to wonder if it was still too much for him. Just then, the instructor from before came up to him, and he asked him why he was practicing against his spirit body. He answered that he was doing so to train his spear skills. The instructor wanted to know if he was confident he could do it, and without any hesitation he responded that he would. At the same time, he could not understand why the instructor was approaching him like this all of a sudden and started guessing if something went wrong during the entrance exam. However, to his surprise, the instructor smiled brightly as he liked the way he talked and gifted him 10 meal tickets. Before leaving, he also told him to come and find him when he succeeded so that he could praise him more, while Cordenlock felt overjoyed after receiving such a gift. He also felt that he was getting nervous for no reason, and he believed that a guy who showed affection using food must be a good sign. Putting all that aside, he got back to his training, and just when it seemed like he was able to get the upper hand, he once again got hit and fell down. As he lay down to catch his breath, Mariette came up to him and gave him a towel, asking if he was feeling exhausted. She poured some water into a glass out of thin air and said to him that he could rest now as he had already worked hard enough. According to her, he just needed to get the hang of it, and he could always come back and try again next time. However, as he took the glass of water, he knew that he did not have a next time, even though he had one just recently by coming back 3 years in time. In the previous life, he had Park Seo with him, who always helped him. They had the player's stat window as well as potions and skill books from the combination window. But now Seo was not there with him anymore because he himself killed him, and now he had no choice but to do everything on his own. He thanked Mariette as he returned the glass and towel and stated that he could always give up later because right now all he wanted was to become the strongest. To do that, he first needed to figure out his limits, and all it was going to be a bit excessive. He just had to test how far he could use his abilities from his past life. As he started using all of his skills back to back, he reached a point where he started realizing that he neither had a strong body nor vast magic power or aura. As for all the information that he had on Park Seo and about the future, it also seemed useless when facing off against monsters and geniuses. However, he understood that to make it out of those situations, he just needed to work harder than everybody if he wanted to be the strongest. He felt confident that his past 3 years would not betray him now, and as he took up the spear once again, he used one of his moves where he threw the spear up in the air. Since he just threw it without aiming, Mariette wondered if he was giving up after all. But then suddenly, when he caught it in mid-air, she realized that he had not thrown it. He had shot it so that he could catch it again. He was finally able to get behind the spirit body, and he impaled the spear right into it, completely destroying the spirit. Mariette was stunned seeing such an amazing sight in front of her, and she thought that cliché words like strong or outstanding did not suit him at all. As she saw him up in the air, holding the spear in his hand, the only thing that came to her mind was honest appreciation, and she found him simply awesome. But then gravity did its job, and he fell hard back on the floor. His spear was broken in half, and his whole body was shaking. At that moment, he realized that he was indeed being excessive with his body after all. The next day in the academy, Mariette was there to tell the students all about the facilities that the academy offered, and while she was doing so, Cordenlock was there thinking that if he wanted to fight properly, working on his body was the most urgent matter. To raise his physical capabilities without relying on Park Seo's elixirs, there was only one way that he could think of, and that was using the commandments. As he looked at Lark, he remembered the one that he had taken, saying that he would not turn a blind eye to other people's misfortune. So he quickly went up to him, and being all friendly, he asked if he wanted to get something to eat with him. He then whispered to him that they could talk about grimoires as well, and Lark got a bit nervous after hearing that. A grimoire was basically a skill book, and it was a powerful artifact that allowed anyone to acquire the corresponding magic or traits just by reading it. The Academy's library boasted a size as large as the Academy itself, and it stored and passed on humanity's knowledge to future generations at the same time. At least that's what they said about it, but he knew that it was all just a facade because in reality, this place existed to hide the grimoires. As the two of them were searching the library, Lark reminded him that in exchange for his help, he must keep his promise, and he agreed, saying that as long as he fulfilled his role, he would surely have the grimoire with the traits written on it. Lark was actually a hard worker and an intelligent student. He memorized all sorts of magic and stored them in his spellbook. But of course, it did not matter how many spells he had stored. Using them all was quite difficult for anyone. If a magician's level and mana level were low, they could not produce good results even if their theory was great. But with a grimoire, it was a completely different story. As Locke was just tossing every book down on the floor, it made Lark very annoyed, and he told him to stop doing that. But then, all of a sudden, he was shocked to see that one of those books opened up a hidden door. Obviously, Locke knew what he was doing, and as they both went inside and started walking, he then turned back and reminded Lark that he must keep his promise if they were going to do this together. Determined, he shook his hand as he understood that he wanted his help to repel evil spirits. But then suddenly, Locke punched him in the face and straight up knocked him out on the floor so that he could now start his plan. Although he just took him out, the first reason why he had come there was actually to help Lark, and the other one was to complete a special quest. If he could capture the evil spirit that was there, he could earn the hidden artifact that he wanted. However, he also knew that this was a quest which was made to be impossible to complete, as he could already feel the special evil spirit, Sabantia Duke, standing right behind him. The Duke immediately launches an attack towards him, and it was said that the attack from this General Duke, who had commanded the South 800 years ago. Most players just die from a single hit. But of course, it did not matter to Locke because he could not even get hit by the spirits because of the restraint that he had where he could not perceive spirits. While the Duke kept on trying to attack, not a single one of them could hit him, and it all just passed through him while he casually stood there because he was unable to see anything. But he could feel that something was indeed happening, so he asked the Duke that since he could not see him at all, could he just enter Lark's body so that they could really fight? In this world, there was a thing called factors. It was an element that changed normal humans into demi-humans like vampires or werewolves. One day, Sabantia Duke awakened as a vampire and killed his own servant. Even though he tried to restrain his vampire skills, he failed to do so, and in the end, out of fear of killing his wife and daughter, he evacuated his family and close ones away from his castle in order to avoid carnage. He used magic to seal himself inside a book, and that was the grimoire that was hidden inside this library. The Duke possessed Lark, and he immediately started charging towards him to attack him. Locke wasn't worried at all because the second reason he had brought Lark with him was because when he gets possessed by the special evil spirit, Sabantia Duke, he could use his latent physical powers to max settings. But since Lark was just a model student inside Asterisk, the heroic legend of Arhan Asterisk, he had the lowest physical strength stat in the entire game, and he takes him out with a single punch. With the Duke out unconscious, he did feel sorry for Lark. However, this was the only optimal strategy for clearing this quest. Now all he needed to do was to kill him while he was still possessed to finish all this, and then he could earn the highest grade items like the Duke's Cape and the Vampire's Armor. These were the exact same items that Park Seo used, and they played a big role in the incidents that were going to occur in the future. But he was different and did not want to follow on his ruthless ways. So he sits down with the spirit and asks him if he wanted to know what happened to his wife, Luina Duke, and his daughter, Cecilia Duke, and what kind of lives they lived after he was sealed. After he calmed down and they both sat together, Locke told him many stories, how his wife died after leaving the castle, and what an amazing adventurer his daughter became where she was able to travel the whole world. The reason he told him all this was, of course, because he did not like the method that Park Seo had used, but also as Locke, the character who also had a family he loved in this world, he felt that the Duke deserved to know, and he wanted to properly end the life of this poor soul. The Duke got emotional after hearing stories about his family, and he thanked him from the bottom of his heart, while also apologizing for attacking him earlier. They shared a long conversation, and after the Duke finally ascended, Locke received a bunch of items like epic-grade soul dust and the grimoire in which the Duke's soul was sealed. He quickly used the grimoire and a new ability named Asterisk Persistent Warrior's Regeneration Asterisk. As the name suggests, it's an ability that would help him regenerate, and although Park Seo also had the same ability, he did not know exactly how much it recovered because he never really got hurt in the first place. Lark finally wakes up, and he informs him that while he was out, he was possessed by an evil spirit. He starts asking questions, if his chin was supposed to hurt when an evil spirit possessed him. But Locke skips that and just gives him the second grimoire that he had gotten from completing this quest, as he had promised him he would. That was also the last reason why he had chosen Lark for this mission. He wanted to see the ones who try the hardest receive a reward, and he looked absolutely overjoyed. Along with completing the quest, since he also fulfilled his duty of not turning a blind eye to kind people's misfortune, he received a total of 80 points, which even left him surprised because based on the game, he could only gain 5 stats from leveling up once, which meant that he must have leveled up 16 times if he received 80 points. Since he did not get a notification of leveling up, he guessed that it must mean the reward for this quest was 8 points and wondered if this total was somehow compensating for the fact that he could not gain stats directly. But in reality, he had gotten 40 points for not turning a blind eye to Lark's misfortune and another 40 for doing the same for Sabantia Duke. Later in the training room, Marriott was yet again offering everyone their some potatoes, and they were going crazy to have one from her. She goes up to Cornlock and asks him if he was once again going to catch the spirit bodies, and he confirms that's what he intended to do. She believed in him and stated that she would be there to cheer him on. However, the other students there became jealous that he was getting her attention and were certain that there was no way a 5th rank from the first year would be able to catch a spirit body. She heard what they were saying about him, so she went on to bet 2 gold coins that he would succeed, while the others started betting against him. He did not care about them at all and just wanted to go do some practice. He was confident that now that he had the stats he earned from helping the Duke, he could for sure catch it, but what he really wanted to know was exactly how much stronger he had become. So he brought out his spear and began the test with the weakest basics first. He decided to start off with the Stab Ominous Serpent technique, which was the most basic of basic attacks under Asterisk, the Calamity Serpent Intense Asterisk, just to see how much progress he had made. Even though he knew it would probably be hard to even make a single cut with it, he was quickly proven wrong as he completely destroyed the spirit body in a single blow. Everyone was stunned after seeing that, and he himself could not believe how much stronger he had become. Marietta came up to him and was happy to see that he succeeded in 1 strike, whereas it took him 3 strikes the other day. He, on the other hand, felt a bit uncomfortable because it seemed she had quite a unique eyesight, as she was able to track his attacks with her bare eyes. She then handed him his share of the money that she made thanks to him after winning the bet from those guys. He wasn't going to refuse free money, so he gladly took it, and they just started laughing. Later at night, while he was eating some potatoes, he contemplated that in his last life as well, he had to fight really hard to polish his martial arts. Even now, he could only barely do up to the 5th step of the 6 steps to enlightenment. He still had a long way to go, but since he was advancing with the spear faster than he had expected, he wasn't that worried. The thing that bothered him the most right now was not having enough mana for activating rune magic. He could not fully resolve this in his last life either because to use rune magic, one needed to have an incredible amount of mana. He believed that if he could just resolve this problem, he could get a lot stronger than he was in his previous life, so he wanted to do it somehow. Just then, someone called out to him, and he immediately recognized that voice. There was a person in this academy who he just could not beat, no matter how much he polished his spearmanship and rune magic. She was one of the strongest forces in the heroic legend of Arhan and was the only female character whom even Park Siu himself could not kill. She was the rank 1 heavenly Yaksha Horan. He had no idea why she wanted to speak to him, so he decided to just ignore her because he knew that she was someone he simply could not handle, and it made him a little scared. But then suddenly she said to him that he did not look like the real owner of that body. It absolutely froze him in place as he began to wonder if she knew that he had actually possessed this body. Horan was a unique kind of contradictory existence, a living corpse that had both human and monster souls within her body. The soul eyes of those in the middle between life and death were said to see the color of people's souls. So if anything, he understood that it might have been even stranger for her not to see it in the first place. She questions him about how he felt about crushing and consuming the original soul of that body, and he just casually responds that he doesn't know. He remembered he actually worried about this a lot in his past life, if he and this Koran Losh were different people, if the memories that he now had in this world were not his own. He often wondered who he really was, who climbed the male middle school, male high school, kinesiology major, and military tree. But after a point, it all just became pointless. He understood that it must be different for Horan since the original was actually with her in that body. She further states that since he was not the real owner of that body, he was just a thief and a robber who had no right to that body. He remains silent for a moment, but then tells her that in the neighborhood next to his hometown, there was a person named Bruce who used to turn into a green giant whenever he got mad, and he asks her if she knew about him. Obviously, he was talking about Hulk, but she had no idea what he was talking about, while he continued that the funny thing about Bruce was, his 2 opposing personalities hated each other, and what they were good at was also very different from each other. But coming back to the point, he explains to her that whether it's the original or the newly formed soul, they both had different characteristics, and that's how they were able to coexist and live. He believed that whether they wanted it or not, they were born in one body, and there was no sin in being born. However, she did not seem to like what he was saying, and suddenly she yelled that in this world, there were some for whom being born was a sin. Cornlock stood there as he understood well the agony of this 3-year-old child in front of him. Right now, he could not really do anything, so he simply took his leave while she just sat there under the tree. The next morning, he woke up early and was heading towards the south part of the academy. The reason why he got up so early and left the dorms before he could even hear the sound of the birds was because it was the start of the weekend and he wanted to go check the mission board. The small and big commissions that were displayed there helped the player to level up in preparation for the next main quest, which simply meant that it was a necessary course of action if he wanted progress. However, his goal wasn't exactly to level up, so there was no need for him to keep doing this. He just wanted to test something else. But putting that aside for a moment, there was Alicia right beside him, and he wondered why she was just staring at the board so hard. Come to think of it, he did not have much info on her because in his last life, Sue gutted her, and his own memories were a bit different from what he had seen in the game. As he calls her out, She immediately bows to him, and he wanted to know why she was looking for missions right from the first weekend, even though she was second rank and there was no way she was desperate for results. Turns out she needed some money, and when he brings up that the activity support fund for the second rank must be more than enough, she explains that the academy was not going to give it to her because her family's income was in the top 10%. Basically, she was suffering from success. Korenlock also recalled that it was similar to Korea's state scholarship, where for those who were coming from wealthy families, there was no activity support fund. She further tells him that since her parents were permissivists, she needed to earn the minimum living expense by herself, no matter how much she asked from them. Seeing that she was in a bit of a complicated situation, he suggested to her that she could take the patrol mission as it was pretty cost-effective. Since they were accepting up to 3 people, she asks if he wanted to do it together with her, but he straight up refuses, saying that he had something else he needed to do. He picks up a very simple mission as his first, where he just needed to find a family's pet named Butterfly. He set out to complete it, and although the EXP and pay were small, it did not matter to him because his goal was a commandment. After saving and returning Butterfly, who almost dies at the hands of a water monster, he was able to block the owner from the misfortune of losing their pet and falling into depression. As a result, the little girl was relieved while he received 5 points for fulfilling his duty. Seeing that the commandment was getting activated, it was clear that even the most trivial missions would give him incredible points. And by just thinking about it, he starts laughing like a maniac, even scaring the little girl. Just like that, he started taking up several small missions where he could fulfill his duty of protecting the innocents and began point farming. But then, all of a sudden, he remembers that there was one mission which he had almost forgotten and was more important than gaining points. Meanwhile, there was a small restaurant, and the owner of the place was going crazy because he had made a sauce using more than 10 ingredients including garlic, carrot, and peppers. But there was not a single sauce that was satisfying his desire to make the most delicious chicken even when cooled. Out of nowhere, Korenlock appears at his doorstep and suggests to him that he should try adding starch syrup. If he did that, his problem would be solved, and with that said, he quickly leaves while the owner just stood there confused, thinking about what just happened. He wasn't really sure if adding starch syrup would help at all, but he still gives it a try, and when he tasted that sauce, he was blown away by how good it turned out to be, and it was exactly what he wanted. As for the reason why Korenlock wanted to crack this mission, it was because he believed that for the Koreans of this world, it would be difficult to survive without Yangnyeom chicken. However, what he was not expecting was that he even got 5 points for helping out the owner. Seeing that the commandment got applied even though he just fulfilled his own selfish interests, he starts laughing hysterically in the middle of the street, as this was the best thing that he could ask for. Meanwhile, there was Hueren who was keeping an eye on him from afar. Suddenly, one of the teachers comes up behind her, and she reminds her that even though she left her alone because she does not leave the city, she still needed to get permission from her to go outside. Hueren simply looks away, and she thinks about what Korenlock had said to her the other night. There is no sin in being born. But then she also remembers how someone had said to her that she should not have been born, and she stood there in silence. Later, everyone gathers at the hunting ground, and the same teacher from before informs the students that they were going to be evaluated based on their survival tactics at the hunting ground. The goal was to arrive at the cabin at the northern part of the forest, and on completing that, they would pass, but just for now. Everyone was required to wear their rank armband, and they needed to return it at the destination, the cabin. Depending on the time that they take to reach the cabin with other armbands, they were going to receive points, and they could use those points to exchange for a prize. Koren was trying to find Hueren, but she wasn't there, and it didn't really surprise him since she never participated in practicals anyway. Just then, Alicia comes to greet him, and when he asks her if she was able to complete her mission, she says that she did, and it was thanks to him that she was able to easily receive some living expenses. He then asks if she wanted to have this candy that he had bought for his younger sister, but it was just way too sweet for her, and Alicia's eyes lit up with excitement as it was her favorite honey bomb candy. Madame Josephine then informs everyone that the test was about to begin, and she creates a big space magic. Koren was always amazed to see her because even though he had seen all sorts of mages, she was the only one who could create the space magic for this many people. In an instant, he gets teleported inside the hunting ground, and he could already hear some people fighting even though they just entered. The hunting ground was an important event where even the professional players had to do countless retries. It was basically a battle royale system where they started at random locations, and then they needed to gain as many points as they could by stealing others' armbands. However, he had no interest in any of the people that he saw fighting around him because he knew who was the most dangerous one right now in this place, the second-rank Alicia with the blue shoulder strap. Since he had already confirmed outside that Hueren was not a part of this test, he was sure that as long as he could deal with Alicia, all the rest would basically be free points. Turns out, he had actually planted a tracking rune in the candy that he gave her, and using that rune, he was chasing after her, looking like a bloodthirsty demon. Meanwhile, outside the forest, Madame Josephine informs the chairman that she was going to go inside as well because even though she had dispatched professors throughout the area, she wanted to be extra careful. Speaking of which, she asks him where Hueren was, and he tells her that she stepped inside on her own, which was surprising because she had never done that before. But this time, she was actually in there, chasing after Koren without him even realizing. Meanwhile, Alicia was fighting off against a group of men, and she seemed to be holding her own even though the odds were against her. One man tries to attack her from behind, but suddenly he gets hit by a rock which was thrown at him. It was in fact Korn, and she was glad to see that he was there to save her, but little did she know he was actually there to take her armband as he started attacking her with his spear. She was shocked and could not believe what he was doing, as she had thought he was a good person because he gave her candy. However, she could not use her Vigilant Eye's ability properly yet, so when it comes to fighting power, she was just mediocre around the second ranks, and that's why Korn was there attacking, to secure himself an easy armband. She was incomparable to her real genius sister, but still, she was among the top 1%. He used that to catch her off guard and started attacking her with force. She was shocked to see how strong he was, and seeing the way that he was swinging at her. All she could do was play on defense because she understood he was playing her and was pressuring her. However, she could see that his moves had gaps, and she just needed to use those intervals between his stabs and cuts. But when she does try to attack him, he instantly blocks her and states that she lacked practice due to over-reliance on her talent. He deflects her attack, pushes down her sword on the ground, and takes a stance to stab her in a straight line. Just by combining these basic attacks, he was able to create the most basic but extreme counter and strikes her so hard she goes flying back. She realized that if she hadn't blocked that attack immediately with her aura, it would have been much more dangerous. It was not that he was super strong or something, but just the mastery that he had over his skills was out of this world, and she began to wonder who exactly he was because clearly he did not look like a mere 5th-ranked knight. She admits defeat, and he finally gets that blue armband of hers. Just then, he hears someone screaming nearby, and when he looks back, all of a sudden, a sword attacks him out of nowhere, but he manages to block it in time. It was very heavy, and he instantly knew that it was a magic sword that was made out of heavy iron stone, which was 4 times denser than steel and was even effective against most large boss monsters. The sword flies back to its owner, and it is revealed that it was Dronzer, another second-ranked character, who was there to take the blue armband. Korn really did not want to fight him there because even after he had slain countless people behind him, he did not seem to have a single scratch on him. He was just on another level from Alicia. And so since he had no other option left, he quickly starts running away because there was just no point in fighting him right now. Even Dron was confused, but he was certain that Korn was carrying the blue armband, so he started chasing after him, throwing all his swords at him. While Korn was running away, he looks back and sees Alicia also running with him, yelling that she did not want to die. He understood that he just needed to take this armband back to the cabin, and that's exactly where he was heading. But when he finally reaches there, he sees Cranel Luden, one more second-ranked character, standing right outside the cabin with his golem, as he also wanted to take that armband from him. The situation was just getting more and more difficult, as in front there was Cranel and behind them was Dron. Even though he was trying to avoid a fight, it now looked like he might have to fight 2 named guys at the same time, and there was simply no way out of this time. So he takes his spear and gets ready to fight both Cranel and Dron as they both charge right at him. Cut to a few moments later, the first winner knocks on the cabin door, and it was, in fact, Korriban, now with 3 blue armbands in his possession, asking if he could choose his prize now. Even the supervisor was amazed to see him holding 3 bands and praise him. When the battle was over, Alicia was simply stunned after seeing all the moves that he pulled in this fight. He pierced the magic sword's core before it could reach its maximum output and then rammed it deep into the ground so that it could not go back to Dron. Using as little movement as possible, he dodged the swords he could not block and guided them right into the golems. Then he moved behind Dron and used him as a shield to protect himself from the golem's attacks. While Dron kept the golem busy, he swiftly destroyed the golem's core as well and went on to deal with Cranel. Judging from his actions, physical or psychological, she got a feeling that he was a person who had fought on the battlefield countless times because he was able to organize every single thing in a single moment. The way that he used just the basic techniques of the spear and his experience to overcome his weaknesses, she felt like she was watching her sister in action. She recalled the words that he had said to her, that she lacked practice due to her over-reliance on her talent, and took them to heart as she realized now that she needed to work hard as well. Dron, on the other hand, was also lost in his thoughts, as before he could even demonstrate his power, he was defeated in an instant, and it looked as if his opponent already knew about his techniques and abilities. Meanwhile, Cranel was on the ground, remembering what Korrin said to him. He advised him that golems were big targets for small but powerful opponents, so instead, he should have found a friend to guard the cabin for him. However, poor Cranel did not have any friends, and this defeat really hurt his soul. It was on this day that the 3 named first years came to remember Korrin and Locke in their own ways, while he, on the other hand, was simply goofing around in the cabin. The only strongest person left among the participants at the hunting ground was the druid who had received the protection of the forest. Her name was Yule, and she could control the trees around her. However, participants were not the only ones there. The strongest person in that entire forest was the greatest mage of Merkaba Academy, Mariette Dunalef. Since the seniors like her were taking on the role of monsters and were helping out with the practice training, the matchup for Yule was too unfortunate, as she literally got one shot by Mariette's water spell. That was the point where the hunting ground practice training was originally supposed to end. But then Horan appears right behind Mariette. Mariette stays in character, and she asks her if she was looking for someone, but she completely ignores her and runs right past her. Suddenly, Mariette blocks her path with an ice wall and tells her that she should not just ignore her like that because, based on the regulations, she was actually a monster right now and she could not do the same to her. Back in the cabin, the teacher there informed Korin that he earned a total of 117 points, and it was a score that had not been seen in a very long time. There were several items that he could choose as his prize, like a matte boar molar knife, a leather protective coat, and a shark bear's bile. The most valuable item among them was the shark bear's bile, but he already had something in mind that he wanted, and that was Mandrake's seed. The teacher was also impressed, seeing that he had quite an eye for things. He then asks him what he would like to do with his remaining 17 points, and he takes a couple of random things like nutritional plant supplements and earmuffs. Coming out of the cabin, he thinks back to how, even among his countless retries of this part of the game, things had never worked out this well for him. On top of that, it was also the first time he saw Lark and Jaeger finish the test as well. He was glad to see that the two of them worked together, and Jaeger suggests that they should go train some more in the stamina training room at night. But instead, he wanted to help Crannel find his golden core because it was precious to him, and asked the two of them to help him out as well. Crannel nervously states that they did not need to do that for him, but Korin wanted to help him because in his past life, he had actually worked quite a lot with him, and there weren't many aggro tanker dealers as good as a golem for this semi-large monster battle. Things seemed to be coming to an end where Crannel was now restoring the core. Alicia was supposedly injured, Drawn was simply out of fighting power, and as for Druid Yule, she looked like she was just dead. He helps her get back up, and seeing her in that condition, he thought to himself that Marriott was doing a bit too much, going so hard on these kids. All of a sudden, the whole area started trembling, and the creatures of the forest were running away from something. With a faint voice, Yule mumbles, "Run away, Marriott," and he begins to wonder what exactly was going on. Marriott was someone who had a natural ability to analyze magic and was blessed with an insane amount of mana. She had never experienced despair, frustration, or failure, and she was the one who was going to continue Josephine's path. To her, this hunting ground was like a playground where she needed to manage the difficulty moderately and help her juniors grow. Or at least that's what he knew about her because, as the scene cuts to Marriott, she seemed to be struggling against Korin. Even when she was trying to attack her with ice crystals, she simply destroyed them all and kept on pressurizing her. Backed into a corner, she realized that she could not fight with just elementary-level magic right now. She started wondering what she should do. However, even though she had made a promise to the senior professors that she would not use attack magic above the intermediate level, she had already begun to use advanced magic against her. So in other words, although she wanted to deny it, she was already using her full power and was getting absolutely obliterated by Hueren as she went flying back right into a tree. At that moment, she understood that what was standing in front of her was not a knight, a mage, nor was it any player. It was just a natural disaster in the form of a human. With a look of fear on her face, she yells at her to not come any closer and stay away from her. Just then, Josephine appears out of a portal in front of her and assures her everything was going to be okay. Seeing her there, Marriott felt relieved, and before she could even say anything, she passed out unconscious. As the hunting ground training practice came to an end, there were several unexpected results that day. Starting off, the first placer who received the highest points was just a 5th-ranked student, Korin. And then there was Marriott, the 2nd-year ace who got injured because of a conflict between her and the 1st-year ace, Hueren, during the test. The news actually scared Korin for a while as well, as he thought if she had already awakened as a boss. However, she seemed to be fine for now, so he guessed that it must be flowing like the original plot. There were still around 3 weeks left until she was going to awaken, and there were still a lot of things that he needed to prepare before that. So he heads out and arrives at the outskirts of the hunting ground forest to meet a being that lived there. He proceeds to put a lot of eye drops in his eyes, and then he throws the seed that he obtained from the training ground into a lake. Acting like he did it by mistake, he starts crying loudly and just starts yelling when suddenly, he hears someone asking him why he was crying so loudly. That was exactly what he wanted, as the person he wanted to meet was finally there. Turns out, in the heroic legend of Arhan, there was an Easter egg that a player could use only once, the gold-axed Taoist hermit. Just like there was that story where a woodcutter accidentally dropped his iron axe into the pond and the Taoist hermit asked him whether the gold or silver axe was his, this was the exact replica. And just like in the original, it used gold and silver axes, so it was limited to weapons that were unique grade or below, and there was no reaction if you threw higher grade items. However, some old-time players started a random challenge, and among them, there were even heroes who dropped rare items. But of course, it didn't work. However, back to the present, the seed that he worked so hard for was eligible, and the hermit asks him what seed was his, gold or silver. He answers that none of them was his, so the hermit presents him with the original one and asks if that was his. He was still acting, and as the tears were coming down his face, he confirmed that the simple one was his, since even after seeing gold and silver, he did not covet them and remain honest. The hermit gifted him all 3 seeds for his honesty and just went back into the lake. The moment he left, Korin's tears stopped and he began laughing as he was successfully able to duplicate his item. The standard mandrake seed had the effect of improving mana, but these gold and silver seeds had very special effects, and these were very rare items that the player could obtain only through this method in the game. In his previous lives, Su had taken the gold one and he took the silver one, but this time, they were all his. As night fell, he recalled that the event which would cause Marriott to become the first boss and awaken into a special vampire was the actual mission that was going to take place in 3 weeks, and that was the encounter with the Fog City's murderous vampire, John Doe. He did not know fully how the agent of the demon tribe inside her was going to awaken, but he still had time. And that was actually part of the reason why he showcased his power against those second-rank named characters. Since there was simply no way someone would want to fight alongside a weak 5th rank, the first thing that could make them interested was his natural talent and strength. In a week, the name were also going to recover fully, and that's when he planned to propose creating a party. He was certain that if he had enough preparation and enough members after these 3 weeks, he would be able to save a girl from her misfortune. Until then, he decided to train Alicia, employ the mercenary of sword control, Dron, coax the Avalon Forest's druid, and become closer with Golem's sorcerer crown. With that in mind, he was confident that if everything went according to plan, this mission would be a piece of cake, as long as there was no unexpected variable. However, it seemed that the unexpected variable just took place as Mariette suddenly woke up in her bed in the middle of the night, and she had already become a vampire, going right after the lady that was taking care of her. A few days later, since Josephine wasn't pleased with what Warren did in the hunting forest, she had instructed her that if she wanted to learn something, she would provide her private lessons. But for now, she needed to stay in her room and self-reflect. As she stayed in her room, she started to consider if she should just jump over the wall. Out of nowhere, Corin comes outside her window and scares the soul out of her. Hanging from a tree, he reintroduced himself to her and asked if she could open the window. Since he did not want to come empty-handed, he even brought a cake for her. She reminded him that coming in there was against the school rules, but he simply said that he was just on a tree right now, and besides, he wasn't scared because Josephine was also not there right now. He had come there just to check on her. However, he was quite surprised to see that she did not even have a single scar on her. But the fact that she was banned from going out getting visitation because of what happened on the hunting ground and was locked up like this for more than 4 days now. He felt that it was a bit too much, even though he understood Josephine's concerns because, after all, she was a special demi-human. Warren then told him that Josephine had actually not been there for more than 4 days, and he was so shocked to hear that he lost his balance and fell straight down from the tree. He immediately started running to find out what was going on because it was definitely not normal for Josephine to leave the most dangerous person in the academy, Warren, alone for 4 days. He also saw the 2 former guardians, the representative martial artist, magic faculty professor, Dina, and night faculty professor, Furmak Damon, running around trying to find someone, and he had a feeling that he already knew what had happened. He went to see Mariette, but the guard there told him that he was not allowed to visit. Corin had brought a sandwich and a drink, and he told the guard that it was Josephine who had sent him. Seeing that he was not allowed to enter, and on top of that, Isabel, who was protecting Mariette, had also gone missing, he knew that something was not right. And the more he thought about it, the more his suspicions seemed to be right. He had actually placed a rune on the sandwich, and the moment the guard took a bite, he got hit with a stomach ache and quickly ran to the washroom, requesting Corin to guard the door for a while. As he entered the sick bay, he hoped for everything to be fine because it was just way too early, 1 month too early. He wanted his suspicions to be wrong, but the moment he removed the blanket from the bed, it was Isabel lying in the place where Mariette was supposed to be. There were vampire marks on her neck, and he realized this was what the professors wanted to hide. Mariette Dunalef had awakened as the first final boss, a vampire, and it was 3 weeks earlier than it was supposed to be, which started to make him really worried. To defeat the first act's final boss, there were 4 phases of the attack strategy. Phase 1, where the player could easily deal with the monster waves. Phase 2, where they needed to hold her back with magic circles. After gaining the upper hand from dealing damage, there was Phase 3, where they needed to face off against the powerful enemy who was rampaging in the realm of blood. When that powerful enemy was knocked out, the final phase was activated, and this last pattern was the heart of this mission. If the player had a combination of the first year named by his side, it was not too difficult to reach Phase 3. However, currently, Alicia was injured, which was Corin's fault. Dron's weapons were destroyed, also his fault. And Cranel's golem core was also destroyed, again his fault. All of the first year named were out of action, and it was all because of him. So all in all, he screwed up. In the original story, after encountering the Fog City's murderous vampire, Mariette attacked her roommate and went on a rampage. In his previous life, after this incident happened, his group was waiting below the dorms where Isabel and Mariette were so they could deal with him quickly. Although Sihu did purposefully let Mariette go, that was a completely different story. But now, thanks to him, things had become a total mess. Alicia had broken her bones into 8 pieces because of him, and as for Cranel, his golem core was broken, so he was pretty much useless. There was Warren. However, he was not sure how the situation might change if she were to join this fight, so he only had one option now. He headed to the stamina training room and informed Dron that he needed to hire the mercenary for a special rank mission, where they needed to find someone and capture them without killing them. Dron told him that it was going to be tough, and it was the rule of mercenaries like him not to join fights they could not win. On top of that, his sword was also broken, thanks to him. But Corin interrupted him and said that the reward was 20 gold coins. Plus, he could take his soul dust item as collateral if he did not trust him yet. In a second, Dron agreed without any questions, and he joined his party. After that, he went into the library to have a chat with Druid Yule, and since he already knew that the reason she was here was to find the Okama alphabet, which was her traditional alphabet and there were no records about it anywhere, he offered to teach her all of it if she helped him in this mission. She agreed and also joined his party. After that, he met up with Jaeger and Lark and explained to them that he was creating a party for a very dangerous and low-pay mission where they might even die because they were facing a special demon tribe. However, if they succeeded, they could gain honor and fame. Hearing that, the two of them sat in silence and wondered if it was too much for them. But then they just started smiling as both of them felt that this was quite romantic. And just like that, they joined him as well. With a sub-dealer, a supporter, and enough people to help him last through the first phase, he had achieved the minimum conditions and successfully created a party. He recalled how Sue had told him that after he defeated her, she was crying and hid in the forest, where it was very hard to find her, and she even stayed there for a month. Since there was only one forest in the entire Merkaba Academy, he gathered his team and headed to the hunting ground. As they walked through the forest, Dron addressed him as employer and asked him how they were going to find Mariette, to which he answered that it would take several years if they tried to find her. What they needed to do was just ask. And then he looked at Yule, who still could not understand how he knew so much about everything. Still, she proceeded to call on the spirits and ask them to lead them to her. Lark and Jaeger were simply amazed to see the whole process and how a bunch of spirits gathered there. Judging from their reaction, Korin also understood that countless spirits must have responded, but of course, he could not see anything. He asked her if they found anything, but all four of them were just staring at him, and they told him there was someone right behind him. A monster attacked him from behind, and he quickly blocked it off using his spear. As he sliced it in half, a whole swarm of monsters was charging right at them. Lark took his position, and Jaeger confidently rushed to the front, but Korin told him not to do that because the monsters would surround him in an instant. He instructed him to go 3 steps back and steadily cut away at their numbers, while Lark was going to cover their backs. He asked Yule to stay in the back with Lark, and as for Dron, he did not need to give him any instruction. He once again reminded them not to go too forward. While Dron was doing his job, he was impressed, seeing that not only was Korin not taken aback by a sudden attack, he gave proper directions and support to everyone, which only showcased that he was experienced as a leader and a strategist who guided the group just like a commander. He did not look like a 5th-ranked knight at all, and he became certain that their academy rank test was just wrong. Jaeger asked Yule why there were countless monsters when they were actually going after Mariette, but she also did not know the reason, as the spirits had only told her this. Lark guessed that she might be controlling them because the monsters never traveled in a pack like this, and on top of that, they seemed several times more ferocious than normal. But then Korin told them that that was not it. Mariette was not a puppeteer or something who could just control these monsters so easily, and even if she was, there was no way she would control them so thoughtlessly like this. There was only one reason he could think of why these monsters were charging at them. It was known that they attack according to their habits, but occasionally there comes a desperate situation that makes them forget their habits. Like if there was something that they could not respond to and they just needed to run from it. In this case, it was Mariette herself. He instructed everyone to be ready, as this battle was far from over, and once again reminded them to stay back to support him, and they trusted him as he was going to take the front. His 3rd commandment, I will save the world, got activated, and it elevated all his stats by 50%. He understood that this meant Mariette's fate was going to have a huge influence on this world, and that's why this commandment got activated right now. The system also wanted him to take the first step towards saving the world by stopping Mariette, and so they got ready to move forward. Even though the 3rd commandment was activated, it also conflicted with the 1st commandment, where he could not turn a blind eye to others' misfortunes. Because even though Mariette was now a vampire, she was actually crying. Yule noticed that, and she felt bad for her. But Dron knew that it did not change anything. They needed to subjugate the demon tribe, and he quickly sent his sword to strike her from above. However, she blocked it using a protective sphere around her, and he was shocked to see that his heavy iron sword was blocked just like that. Lark recognized that shield, and it was called an orb, which was born from a vampire's blood. But what surprised him even more was that a newly awakened vampire like her wasn't supposed to create such an orb already. Korin assured them they did not need to be scared because the vampire was just born and could not properly receive her blood or mana. So while she was not being supplied blood from her mom, she was not going to do anything but block. However, Dron pointed out that defensibility was the main weakness of a mage, and now that it was covered, it was kind of a big deal. Korin also agreed on that. Mariette then launched a wide-range attack, and Yule proceeded to do her thing. Since they were currently in a forest, this entire area was her stage, and she raised up a giant wall using the trees and her spirit's protection. However, the attack from Mariette was no joke, and it was getting hard for Yule to maintain the wall. That one move alone had taken away half of her mana, and since she did not have much time to recover after the hunting ground test, her mana heart was already throbbing. However, she wanted to keep going because Korin had made a preposterous promise to her. He understood that she was reaching her limit, but he asked her to keep going just a bit longer as he was going to turn the tables in just 5 moves. The Vampire Mariette Dunalef boss fight was divided into 4 phases. Phase 1 was where surrounding monsters attacked the player's party. Then in Phase 2, after they defeated the monsters, she came out herself, and from that point, they needed to go from Phase 2 to Phase 4 to enter the final boss's attack pattern. In simple words, until the final phase started, she was not using her full power. This pattern was the same in the game and his previous life as well. As the wall was starting to break, he instructed Lark to leave before Yule, since he could only use beginner magic around 2 more times. Then, once Yule joined him, they needed to go as far away as possible. Until now, the number and scale of attacks were big, but they were not that powerful. The real thing was the alchemy magic that was going to happen now, and it started as frozen blood crystals began to tear down the wall. It finally collapsed, and while everyone else stood in shock, Yule used all her remaining powers and started casting a spell. Corin had already engraved some text in that area to help her, but because she was a pure-blooded druid, only she was able to activate this spell. It was an ancient text with a system and methods that belonged to another ancient time, and it was something that could only be obtained after finishing the Yule scenario, where she always worked to grow as a sage of the forest. It was a text that belonged to a family of sages who loved spirits, and as all the trees in the area began to float, it combined to make the giant willow doll Wicker Man. Yule herself could not believe she was able to summon him, while Corin thought to himself that even though it was kind of considered cheating for him to help her out like this in this situation, there was simply no other way. He instructed Jaeger to throw the owlbear that was still alive among the monsters from earlier to the Wicker Man, and he was surprised that he was actually right and there was an owlbear still alive. Of course, he had already prepped this all in advance, and they just did not notice it before. He threw the owlbear at the giant, and as soon as it hit him, it exploded. The golem needed this sacrifice to burn inside its hollow wooden prison because it was a golem-type magic weapon that moved until it completely burned out. Mariette attacked the golem with her blood magic, but it blocked it off with its bare hands and launched a counterattack. However, it was already getting too much for Yule, and it was turning out to be difficult for her to maintain it. Corin asked her not to stop controlling it because if she did, they were all going to die there. And even though she was in a lot of pain, she still held on. Mariette once again attacked the golem, and it simply took all of them without even flinching because a Wicker Man was not a living creature, but a structure. So having holes in its body was not going to break it, or at least that's what Corin had thought. But then, all of a sudden, one of her attacks pierced the golem's core and turned off the Wicker Man's fire, leaving Corin completely stunned. As the Wicker Man fell down, he realized that the common sense he had of this world was flipping over and collapsing right in front of him. This was what truly meant going up against the special level difficulty, Mariette Dunalef. Yule ran out of power, and he quickly instructed her to back off. She tried to insist, but he told her that her being there now was not going to change anything, and she also knew that. So she agreed and ran back while Jaeger asked him if just the three of them could really do it by themselves. Corin simply grabbed his spear and said that she had now used up all of her wide-range attacks, which only meant one thing. It was time to fight her head-on, and he charged towards her. As the three of them moved forward, dodging her attacks, Dron tried to use one of his swords, but the orb was still protecting her. Just then, Jaeger jumped in the air and struck the same spot from above, destroying the orb that was protecting her. That was his special attack, Cumulative Destruction, where the power of the attacks he faced accumulated, and that was exactly what Corin needed. But then Phase 3 activated, and Mariette initiated the Realm of Blood, making a giant sphere which covered the entire area. When the dust settled, both Jaeger and Dron were defeated, and Corin was the last one standing. They were now stuck in the Realm of Blood, and it was a trap that got activated when the blood orb shattered. Since she was only doing the minimal defense when the orb got shattered, it forcefully sucked up her blood and mana, and had created an entirely new creature that now stood before him. He never imagined that he would be the last one left so early because to clear this whole fight, they usually needed at least 3 people by their side until the 3rd phase. But it did not really matter to him now because as he picked up his spear, he was certain that the result was going to be the same. We then go back to the night when Mariette turned into a vampire. It was common knowledge that as humans, we are able to differentiate between humans and livestock, and that's why humans feel cringed and shut their eyes while watching the desperate struggles of livestock who don't want to die. As she woke up in the night, she could feel a cold air flowing through her body, which was contrary to the feeling that she had of her throat burning up. That throat found its way to Isabelle's neck, who was sitting beside her, and she quickly bit her. Her canines, which had naturally always been there, broke the skin and reached Isabelle's vessels. The livestock in front of her was trembling, and she did not know if it was fear or resistance, but she did not care and did not even feel a need to cringe and close her eyes. She found the sound of her painful moans as beautiful as the melody of a piano, and the blood that flowed through her throat warmed up her cold skin. And just like that, she sucked the blood out of her and left her lying on the floor. Isabelle's moans and the creaking of the bed had stopped as well, and only the beating of her heart, which felt as if it might explode, was spreading throughout her body. The scent of blood was suffocating and disgusting her, and her body began to feel like it was collapsing. Because that was the moment when she realized that it was not livestock in front of her but a human, and she had committed a crime where she had almost killed her friend as if she was killing livestock, which made her tear up. As soon as she realized she treated humans like livestock, she grabbed her famished stomach and ran away into the forest until Corin came there to find her. The bloodhound roars in front of him and launches an attack, but he simply slices it in half. The hound then creates 2 small copies of itself, but as they try to attack him, he simply evades them and then stabs them from behind using his spear. After taking care of those 2, he starts mocking the hound, and then suddenly, it starts moving really fast. For a second, Corin also thought that it just vanished. However, it was simply moving so fast that he could not see it. But he wasn't scared at all and tells the monster that what was important for a victory was not 100 steps but looking for weak points with 1 step, which he already knew, and he attacks it right at its weak spot using his spear. The Realm of Blood completely shatters, and he successfully killed the bloodhound. Even though it was dying, it looked like the monster still wanted to protect its creator until the end, and Korin noticed that as he himself was there to actually save Mariette, who had now entered the final phase. In the game, as soon as this phase starts, she puts one of the party members into a critical condition, and that was why no one could clear it alone. Normally, in order to save the party member who became the target of the bloodsucking, all party members were needed to stick close together and beat her together, but now that he was all alone, she quickly charged right at him. As there was no one who could help him right now, he surrenders and she starts sucking his blood. You could feel his life being sucked out of him, however, he was not giving up and decided to endure it as he had the exact skill that he needed for this moment, persistent warrior's regeneration. Even though the skill was keeping him alive, he was still in pain, but he kept enduring because he wanted to return this kind girl back to how she was when she used to share all those potatoes with everyone. So as an adult, he simply pats her head and tells her to take her time. All of a sudden, she stops and starts crying. Korin recalls how Sabansha Duke had also sucked the blood and killed his servant the moment he awakened as a vampire. Even a great commander who was left in history could not control his urge to suck blood. However, as for Mariette, it took 1 month for her to be caught by Park Siu alive, and during that month she only drank the blood of monsters of the forest, which was just like drinking seawater, and it only made her thirst worse. But even then, she did not kill people, and she endured her urges and thirst through simply her willpower. That's why he wanted to believe that there must be another ending to this story that must exist, and now that became a reality as Mariette starts crying on top of him, repeatedly apologizing to her junior. He thought to himself that in his previous life, maybe he also looked at her as just a character as Sibu did. However, the teachings of his master, whom he met in this world, had made him into a different person. His teacher also used to fight with his spear, and he remembered how she once called him a child and said that as long as she was an adult, she had the duty to protect him. The person that he used to look down upon for being a game NPC protected him and said that he was a child. So, as her successor, who saw her last moments and studied her teachings, he felt that it would be okay to make it a little obvious that he was an adult. Now that he was successfully able to save Mariette, he once again gets determined to walk on a different path from Park Sihu. Later, inside his space prison, which was made by Professor Josephine, Mariette was inside his cell, eating potatoes like her usual self when Korin came to visit her. He asked Josephine if he could go inside, and she wasn't so sure, but he assured her that he trusted her. Seeing that she was still enjoying potatoes, he asked her if she still found them tasty, even though her taste buds might have changed, but she said that it was one thing that always tasted amazing no matter how they cooked it. Suddenly, he got a bit too close to her, and she got all embarrassed and told him to stay away as she was still smelling. After cooling down a little, she then confessed to him that she was very scared when she fought against Huron, and she really thought she was going to die there. But even when she was scared, she was not able to do what he did for her. Korin also thought to himself that when she met Huron, it must have evoked something in her, which made her change her mind and participate in the hunting ground practice. There she coincidentally met Mariette, and in order to face the first-rank mage, she also went ahead and used all her actual powers. That provoked Mariette, and the vampire inside of her also reacted. She also wanted to know why he did not give up on her. It was the same when he was training with the spirit bodies where everyone mocked him, but in the end he was able to do it. She asked him how he kept on doing that, and he told her that it was nothing that impressive. He just always liked happy endings. Where the good guys were rewarded and the bad guys were punished, he always loved that type of ending. She was a person with a good heart, and since she was always nice to everyone, he said to her that he would like it if she could continue to be happy. She got all red-faced and at a loss for words. She requested him to leave for now as she needed to freshen up. So with that said, he took his leave from there while she sat there, thankful to him for comforting her. However, she was not sure if she even had a right to be happy anymore. It turned out she was going to be isolated temporarily, which was understandable since such a huge thing happened, and it was going to be difficult to go back to normal immediately. However, Korin believed that the isolation might end soon since the demi-human Huron was already going to school with no problems. He was sure that even if Mariette awakened as a demi-human, most people wouldn't be scared of her anyway. As he was walking back, the chairman himself came up to him and asked if he could have a moment of his time. It was his first time meeting him, so he started off by asking him how he was feeling and then informed him that he wanted to talk about Mariette's punishment. He started to get worried as he had not even thought about the consequences and wondered if this really wasn't going to lead to a happy ending. He requested the chairman to reconsider it as he tried to explain everything to him, since he was the one who actually fought her. But then the chairman simply smiled and told him that there was actually no punishment for her. He also did not believe that she was dangerous anymore, and he just wanted to see the attitude of someone who actually fought her. Now that he was able to see his reaction firsthand, how he was trying to defend her, he had no doubts left about his decision. He also assured him that her isolation was going to end soon. They just needed to seek her stability first. With that said, even though he had heard the story from other students, he wanted to know more about the details, and he asked him if he could share some with him. Korin took a sigh of relief, and he went on to explain everything that he felt was all right to share. Things like Mariette was just a child, not a monster, and although he did not know how much the chairman believed, he tried to send a clear message from his side. The chairman then thanked him for sharing all these details with him and stated that he was soon going to make an official statement regarding this, but of course, they could not say everything transparently. Nonetheless, he expressed his gratitude to Korin and bowed to him, leaving him quite surprised. He was truly thankful for his help in preventing the danger created by the inexperience and complacency of the adults and was ready to do his best to repay him. Korin also knew that Chairman Arya Kaisar was a type of person who always acknowledged his weakness and tried to take on more responsibilities. Remembering the words that he said to him in his last life, he trusted his goodwill and so he requested him to raise his head. Meanwhile, Marriott was in her cell still thinking about when Korin saved her. As she felt his hand on her back, her rationality, which had drifted, started to come back to her, and she was able to re-find her humanity. The only thing she could do then was apologize. But now, as she worried about Isabel, she felt she was not even worthy of people's forgiveness. Because she was a person who liked people more than anyone, her guilt started to eat her. That's why she did not resist Professor Josephine's magic, which imprisoned her at all, and just accepted locking herself up behind iron bars. When Korin visited her, although she did not show it, she was exhausted at that time. She saw herself as a beast, a demon, and an enemy of humans who might yearn for human blood at random times. But when he told her that he wanted her to be happy, all her concerns went flying with just that one sentence. To her, those words rang with honesty more than anything she had ever heard, and it made her tear up. Remembering how he threw his body to her in order to save her, she realized that this moment with him was going to stay in her memory forever now. Time moved on, and then 1 week later, people were still talking about Marriott. Although there was a bit of chaos due to some retards who opposed her staying at the school, since the demi-human Huron was already obediently attending school, that opinion of theirs quickly lost steam, and officially, Marriott Dunalef's isolation was finished. However, when she returned, even though people were happy to see her, she was still concerned about Isabel as she could not find her anywhere. Hence, even though her isolation was done, she was still not ready to free herself yet and skipped classes. As she sat in her room, she guessed that Isabel might hate her now because, putting herself in her shoes, she also understood that she would not want a friend who bit and sucked her blood. She did not want to get in the way of others, and looking at the bag of blood in front of her, she decided that she would disappear from this academy. But just then, someone knocked on her door, and when she opened it up, it was Isabel, who immediately hugged her. Emotionally, she asked her if she was okay and how she was feeling, while Marriott, on the other hand, was just confused to see her there. She asked her if she wasn't scared of her after what she did to her. However, Isabel simply smiled and said that she saw everything before she fainted, how she was crying and felt bad for hurting her. She told her that no matter what happened, she would always be her friend and wanted her to also feel the same. Hearing that, she burst into tears and simply thanked her. Isabel further explained that she was already feeling better after some time of that incident, but the hospital was not allowing her to go out just yet, so that's why she was not able to meet her even after her isolation was over. However, there was one tall junior who helped her secretly sneak out of there, and she understood who she was talking about. She got all shy and hid her face as she realized that he helped her out once again, and the only thing that she could now think about was him. With that, the first part of the story ended with a happy ending for everyone, which had never occurred in the game or Korin's last life. Even though a lot of unexpected things happened and not a single thing went according to his plan, he liked it even better because of that. He now understood that even without a player, the world goes on, and even without following the plan, there existed better endings. This act had helped him to confirm the beginning of a new world. As time went on, Korin's schedule started to become somewhat desolate, with the repetition of class, lunch, class, training, dinner, training. But he needed to get stronger soon, as he knew that the scenario with a certain girl was approaching quickly. So as he continued to train himself with a spear, Marriott also came there to see him and was happy to see that he was back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Since he was working so hard, she brought some food for him and asked him to eat up. The two of them sat together, and when he started eating, she noticed that he was dripping some blood and just started staring at it. When he pointed out why she was staring, she got embarrassed and told him it was nothing while thinking that she should really control herself from drooling like this. He brought up that she was actually drinking blood nowadays and was curious if there was any difference between live blood and a blood pack. She explained that there was a bit of a difference, like in the freshness and the taste of it. It was similar to the difference between frozen meat and just cut meat, and seeing that she was essentially fated to eat frozen meat for the rest of her life now, he offered her that she could drink his blood sometimes. Her face turned completely red, and she questioned him about what he was talking about. He told her that it was fine since he could regenerate anyway, and he understood that she must be getting tired of blood packs. So he teased her and asked if she wanted to have some right now, while she, on the other hand, refused as she did not want to bother him. Putting that aside, she handed him an elixir to help him recover and stated that it was made from vampire's blood, which was one of the greatest magic ingredients in the world. With no questions asked, he quickly drank it up, and the effects were already visible as many of his stats went up, and he could feel the energy welling up inside him. He felt that he was definitely stronger than in his last life. So since that was the case, he believed that he could start the scenario with that certain girl now. The scene then shifted to Alicia Arden, who we already know was the direct descendant of the garden-renowned swordsmanship family and a second-ranked knight at the academy, whose life had now changed a lot from before. After seeing the sheer difference between her and a fifth-ranked knight that she met during the hunting ground practice, she realized that she needed to work on herself more, and she began to put in the effort toward that. But of course, it did not seem to be holding on well, as she was back to her usual self, eating her favorite honey bomb candy and strolling around without any care. She was fundamentally lazy and unaspiring, with no concern or heart towards swordsmanship, although her talent as a swordsman was near genius. When it came to her personality, she was a terrible student who always received failing marks. just thinking about how, whenever she was out shopping, she did not have to wave her sword 1,000 times, get examined as she repeated her basic moves, or duel with anyone made her extremely happy, and she just wanted to enjoy times like these. But just then, Korin came behind her and called her out. He questioned her about why she was not at the training room these days, and she nervously answered that she had a lot of assignments and missions to do in these past few days. He told her that there was a way where she could make a lot of money, and that was by joining his party, while she, on the other hand, was getting frustrated, thinking why he kept on looking for her, as she really did not want to be approached by him. The reason being, whenever she was in front of him, she always felt like her lazy habit of trusting her talent alone was exposed. Above all, she found his methods of training to be way too hard because he always kept talking about the basics, while she wanted to try making a cool, lethal move. But then he offered to give her 2 gold coins if she would come with him for 2 second-ranked difficulty missions, and hearing that, she immediately started calculating that she would be able to get a lot of clothes and honey bomb candies. So just like that, she agreed to join him. Furthermore, he informed her that he was going to a 20 silver coin short-term mission, and suggested she should join him as well. Again, hearing the money that was in it, she agreed to come along. Korin believed that this should be enough for activating the scenario, and although he was not sure about it, he guessed that the event would be taking place in just a short while now. Alicia used to love the patrol missions from the mission board because in those she just needed to follow a route in the middle of the city and check if there were any problems. The monsters that came near the city were 5th or 4th rank at most, with the occasional rare appearance of mid-level monsters. She was in the middle of one such mission and was nearly finished with it as she asked the captain to take the claws and leather from the monsters they defeated and sell them. There was not much to do in these missions, but one could make enough money, and that's exactly why she liked them, because it was not too burdensome. Above all, in such missions, her teammates always put her up on a pedestal, praising her swordsmanship and for taking out so many monsters so easily. On the contrary, her family always used to remind her how her sister had already reached the supreme stage at her age and that she was nothing compared to her. However, during these missions, she could forget about them and reassure herself that she was not that bad. Korin, who was with her, asked her to take care of the owlbear, but she told him she had already dealt with him, which surprised him a bit as well. Later, as the night fell, the patrolling was over and it was supposed to end there happily and safely, but then, all of a sudden, they saw a green light in the sky, which was a signal from the preceding patrol group, and it meant there was a nest of monsters that were at least 2nd rank. Alicia could not see that light when her comrade explained to her that it was a magic firework that could only be seen with the special goggles everyone else was wearing. Normally, when nothing much happened on a patrol, it could also end without even killing a single monster, but when changes like this occurred, everyone present there had a duty to participate in the raid, and lazy Alicia saw it as a hassle. Meanwhile, her group was hyping her up, and Korin, on the other hand, was smirking as his prediction turned out to be right. The nest of 2nd-rank monsters that was found was a nest for the wolves centered around a werewolf, the same monster that Alicia had defeated even when she was in a state of being poisoned. They were able to defeat them easily this time as well. However, after they were done with them, another creature appeared in front of her, the 1st-rank monster, Dullahan. Alicia began to stress out, wondering why something like that was there, but nonetheless, she quickly reached for her sword, unsheathed it, and attacked the monster using territory cut. However, to her shock, the Dullahan dodged her attack with extreme flexibility and captured her with its tentacles. Knowing that she was backed into a corner and there was nothing she could do now, she called out to Korin and cried for help, as the pride of a warrior was something that she did not have at all. Her comrades told her that he was fighting a different monster, and she began to cry even louder. Just as the monster was about to attack her, all of a sudden, its head got chopped off and it fell to the ground. As Alicia looked up to see who saved her, she recognized the sword that was in front of her. It was the eldest daughter of the Arden family, likely the next-term heir and the greatest swordsman of this generation, who was going to continue the path of the sword genius, Alicia's elder sister, Lunia Arden. Looking down on her, she questioned Alicia about why she was in such a state and why she didn't properly analyze the enemy and back up the moment she saw Dullahan. But above all, what annoyed her was the way that she stupidly unsheathed the sword, trying to sloppily copy someone. Alicia apologizes to her, but she tells her that the consequences of her actions were completely her fault and that sorry wasn't going to cut it. Her casual actions endangered the soldiers who trusted and followed her, and Alicia understood that. Lunia then hits her sword on her shoulder and reminds her that swordsmen of Arden must always stay confident. Yet again, she simply responds with, "Yes, ma'am." She then also calls out Korin, and he wondered if she actually noticed that he was watching Alicia the whole time while pretending to be busy. She goes ahead and introduces herself as the Divine Sword, the Great Disciple, as well as the first Sword Pavilion Master. He does the same by bowing down to her and introduces himself as the 8 Hanging Spears Disciple and also as Alicia's friend. She remained suspicious and questioned him if that was all he had to say, and Korin knew exactly what she wanted to know from him. However, he was not going to reveal his spearmanship because there were only 2 other people besides him who used the same form. Seeing that he was not going to tell her anything, she looks away from him, and then her comrades inform her that all the monsters in the area had been dealt with. Her troops consisted of 2nd-rank knights, and they were also known as the 5 Swords: Milia, Lena, May, Siren, and Jenny. All of them were at the same rank as Alicia or even higher. They ask Lunia if they should chase after the fleeing monsters, but she instructs them that there was no need for that and prepared to head back. She also tells Alicia that she was actually coming with her. It is then explained that the swordsmen in this world tend to enjoy traveling in groups. Those who were commonly known as the Sword Faction were partly gangster-like swordsmanship organizations, and they followed their leader by banding together and eventually began to consider themselves as a separate sect. 60 years ago, the sword genius Garen began a new generation of swordsmanship. As the Curtin family head began to spread the idea of martial arts schools, Arden became a renowned swordsmanship family that represented the entire continent. We then come back to Merkaba's Arden studio, where the lingering scent of their unique command, discipline, and gangster-like tendencies was still there even today. Alicia bows to Lunia and formally greets the first pavilion master, while all the others present in the room are simply confused as they have no idea why someone like her, who was the main family's direct descendant disciple, was kneeling down. Lunia goes over her history of missions, and it wasn't impressive, as it consisted of patrol missions, tradesman security missions, and fourth-rank monster group raid missions. There was also this cafe helper mission, and she questions her about what that was all about. Alicia explains that there she had to wear a uniform and advertise flyers. She asks her why she was doing something like this, and she embarrassingly replies that she found that uniform pretty. Looking at her, Lunia tells her that she was really pathetic, using her guardian certificate that she got as a favor from the main family for something like this, and questions her if she was actually trying to tarnish the Arden name. She tells her that all these missions she had been doing, where she only needed to face low-ranking monsters, were just her trying to act like a hero by defeating these monster raids even when she was not. Her words struck hard, and all of a sudden, Alicia remembers an old man who had told her that she could never escape from her essence, and she just sat there with her head down. As she left, Lunia's 5 swords discussed among themselves that she seemed to be healthy, but Lunia did not care. She asked them if they knew anything about the boy that was with her. They tell her that they did not know much, only that he was a 5th-rank knight, but she did not believe it, and thought about whether Merkaba Academy's rank test had become that unreliable. She saw that his eyes were locked on Alicia from the start until the end, while the monsters around him could not even get 20% of his attention. That type of skill wasn't just any type of experience, and it wasn't just a level of practice either. It was something that one could only attain from polishing their skills through real combat. And the way that he was using his spear, on the surface, it might look simple, but for someone who had reached the height of Arden's style, she could tell exactly the destination of that spearmanship. Even though it was a short encounter, she was quite satisfied with him, and she started to think it might be better if he stayed with her younger sister. She recalls that she had received a request from the academy, and she guessed that she might be able to see him again soon. Later, Corin continued with his training while Maria always brought a lot of food for him. As he takes a bite out of one of her dishes, he asks her if there was mutton in it, and she tells him it was raw meat that arrived just today. Josephine had asked her to help with the slaughter process, so she was able to practice that as well. Meanwhile, Corin was simply moved, seeing that while she was living this sad vampire life, eating frozen meat, she was giving him such delicious food, and it made him tear up. She then asks him if he liked braised oxtails, as she was planning to bring that next time. Suddenly, he takes her hand and tells her that he likes it very much. Yet again, she is all shy and nervous and promises to bring it next time, while at the same time, she starts praising his rough and scar-covered hands. Just then, Isabel calls her out, and she gets all embarrassed, jumping around, yelling things, and then just leaves while Corin sits there, thinking that he really did not know much about kids at this age. In his previous life, he could not date once within the 3 years because of Park Sue's interference. He did have some situationships, but the reason he could not make it into a date was all because of Sue. As for his current platonic relationships, they were very different from his previous life. Sometimes Yule used to bring him rare and precious mushrooms from the forest, and then they would go straight to the library, where he was teaching her the Ogun alphabet. Dron used to come looking for him quite often too, but rather than friendship, he seemed to consider him a useful colleague, where if there was a difficult mission with good pay, he would ask him to join his party. As for Jaeger and Lark, he was close with them, and they took classes with him. But when he came to meet them, they suddenly started screaming. When he turned around to see what happened, Horan was standing behind him, and she just said 2 words, "Food promise." He recalls that he had promised to buy her a meal when he went to meet her in her room, and was a little bit impressed that she actually remembered because it was over a month ago. He tells Jaeger and Lark that he would not be able to stay with them today, but they had no problem with it whatsoever, as the 2 of them were just running away, scared of Horan. With that out of the way, he then takes her to a fish restaurant and asks her if she was liking it, while she, on the other hand, was simply stuffing the whole fish in her mouth without stopping. He tells her it was not respectful to the food, and she argues that all they need to do is just chew and eat, but then he cuts a piece of fish, puts it on top of rice, and serves it to her, telling her that instead of simply consuming it, she should respect it and feel its scent. She listens to him and starts eating slowly while he sits there, thinking to himself that the weapon production was almost complete, and although it was a bit early, the second part was coming soon. The intro of the second part was the midterm exams. Jaeger was stressed out as he hadn't studied at all, even though Lark was telling him to. He asks Corin if he was prepared for the test, and he confidently responds that he did not need to do anything like that. It wasn't his first time taking this exam, so he was pretty sure he would get rank number 1 even without studying. However, the moment he read the first question, his soul left his body and he realized he was screwed. After the test finished, Jaeger and Lark looked at him and asked how his paper went, but he just sat there, still in shock, and replied that a knight just needed to know how to write his name. His answer sheet was completely blank, and even Jaeger had finished 1 or 2 questions. It turns out he had forgotten that he never actually studied in his past life, and since he only continuously researched expert skills, he did not know any of the actual knowledge of this world. However, he refused to sit down like that because of a mere written test, as there were still ways to redeem himself. We cut to a battle arena for the highlight of midterms. It was one of the easiest events in the game, which provided the player a golden opportunity to redeem the marks they failed to obtain during the written exam. This activity was composed by the night faculty professor or some other temporary instructors who were invited from outside the academy. 15 students per team needed to face them and show their skills. On the basis of that, they received a grade from the professors in charge of the evaluation. Because Korin was a 5th ranked knight in name, he was certain that the level of the instructor assigned to him wouldn't be that high. During this, you could get additional points if he managed to defeat the instructors, so with that in mind, he started grinning, thinking that no matter who his opponent was, he would defeat them and recover from his written exam score. However, all of a sudden, he noticed that the people around him were shocked to see someone, and he wondered who this instructor was that was making them react like that. Turns out, Lunia Arden had arrived there, and she was actually there to meet him, which left him stunned as well. The practical test for first-year group it commences, and the evaluator announces that their opponents were the specially invited guests, elites of the renowned swordsmanship family, Arden, the 5 swords of the First Sword Pavilion. The students start rushing at them while Dron just stands in the back calculating the odds. All of his opponents were second rankers, while on his side only he and Alicia were second rankers. The 5 girls use a combined attack, and in an instant they send all the students who are charging at them flying back. Their vision is completely blocked by dust. Dron understands that the odds of winning were not that high, as they were all experienced enough to block their large number of enemies' vision first. Nonetheless, he prepares himself to fight when suddenly the phantom sword, Milia, tries to attack him from behind, but he blocks her with his sword. Alicia gets distracted by that, and her opponent, the high-speed sword Jenny, takes advantage of that and closes in on her, reminding her that she was facing her. She gets her leg and makes her fall over, telling her that her posture was too unstable. She keeps on pressuring her while Alicia plays on defense. Meanwhile, the other students there were just amazed to see the 5 swords in action. They were making all their opponents fall down one after another, except Dron and Alicia, who were still fighting. Dron uses all his 5 magical swords and aims them at Milia, who gets overwhelmed by them, and it seems he is going to be victorious soon. However, Alicia, on the other hand, is barely managing to hold her own as Jenny keeps on repeating that she still needed a lot more practice. She also states that if this was all she could do, she should not even bother graduating and should just drop out so that she could receive proper training at home. However, she gets mad and pushes her back. For a split second, she feels that her vigilant eyes have worked as she opens her eyes to see the territory. However, she was not looking directly into the territory yet, which gave Jenny an opening and she defeated her. Originally, Lunia Arden was supposed to take on this role against Alicia in the original storyline, but now she was acting as the examiner for Korin's group, Group B, and he could not understand why. She brings out her sword and warns them that they should think of this battle as an experience in a Great Special Rank War. The Great Special Rank War was a class of monstrosity that could take on an army by itself. It was a plain disaster that even dozens of guardians could not be sure they would win against. Marriott and Horan were prime examples of that type of disaster, a monster that most guardians would never encounter in their lifetimes. If anyone told stories of them, they were simply treated as mere bluffs. However, when it comes to Lunia, she was actually someone who could go head-to-head against a monster of that caliber, and she quickly demonstrates that by unleashing an attack that destroys the entire area around her in an instant. She was a monster among monsters. While every other student was falling down, Korin had taken shelter behind a wall. Jaeger was beside him, and he was absolutely terrified as he felt that he could have died there. He started yelling, asking why she was going so hard, but Korin tells him that she was actually going easy on them because if she wanted to be serious, this whole thing would have ended in 10 seconds. He then points out what he was holding in his hand, and it turns out he was casually carrying an unconscious Lark because he thought he might have died if left alone. Suddenly, a surprise attack from Lunia takes Jaeger out as well, and she calls out Korin, telling him to come out as all that was left was just the 2 of them. He comes out and asks her if he could just surrender. She answers that he could, if he wanted to get the low score, that is, but she also knew that he wasn't going to do that, because he wouldn't want to waste a rare opportunity like this to fight a powerhouse. He simply smirks as she could see right through him, and he thinks about his previous life where he and Lunia were comrades and had fought together many times. His master was his teacher for the spear, but she was the one who had taught him real-life combat techniques. That's why by the end of the previous round, he was no match for her at all. There was a wall that he knew he had to break through at some point in this life. So he was great with his spear because he understood that if he were to take the place of a player, he needed to surpass her with his own strength. She quickly charges at him with her sword, and he manages to block her attack. The 2 of them exchange blows, but all he could do was just block while she kept on attacking him. For a split second, he finds an opening and tries to counter, but she was too fast and once again attacks him, forcing him back to defense. Meanwhile, everyone was shocked seeing the 2 of them fight like that, even though he was just a 5th-ranked knight, and they could not believe that he was actually holding his own against Lunia. But then Korin runs out of gas and gasps while Lunia also stops as she notices that he was almost drained of energy. She sheathes her sword, and he begins to wonder if that meant she thinks he did enough hard work. However, he knew completely well that there was no way that was possible. What she was actually doing was preparing for Territory Cut, the move that foreshadows the most powerful technique of the mightiest Sword Emperor Garand. She takes the stance, shaking the entire arena, and tells him to show her a worthy response with his spearmanship. Everyone there knew that what was about to happen was way too dangerous, and even the professors tried to stop her because she would kill him with that move. They call off the test, but then, all of a sudden, the moment she initiates the move, the whole world comes to a standstill. The only thing that moves through the frozen world was Lunia's translucent reflection. Her sword moved slowly, as if in slow motion, while Corrin was pushing his spear at full speed toward her. That was clear as crystal to him. However, in this domain, his spear was just not moving, as he could not move in this frozen world. The only thing that he could perceive to some extent was how the world had just stopped in time. Thoughts start coming over his mind, if it was just a coincidence what he was able to pull off with Mariette, and if he was still not able to control the territory. However, he does not stop and tries his hardest, because all he needed to take was only one step. It did not have to be perfect. He just needed to take it and push his spear against her sword. He finally manages to do it, touching his spear against her sword, which leaves even Lunia surprised, resulting in a huge impact. Everyone present there stands in shock, while she's impressed to see that, in the end, he was able to react to the territory. She decides to conclude it there, and seeing that his spear was literally sliced up from between, she suggests that he use a better spear from now on because his gears were too weak for his skills. She then notices Alicia, who just stood there in awe, mind-blown by what just happened. She pieces it together that the test wasn't even important for Corrin, and the reason why he did not avoid the fight was just to showcase the territory. She questions him if he knew about Alicia's talent as well, and he just stands there, smiling, because even though he lost the fight, he had achieved his goal. She tells him that she was going to stay in this city for a while and warns him not to interfere because no matter how hard he tries, nothing was going to change, and she would crush Alicia with her own hands. Corrin, on the other hand, was confident that now that he had shown her the territory, things wouldn't go as Lunia Arden had planned. The evaluator then announces that, as a result of a unanimous decision from the instructors, Corrin received full marks and maximum additional points on the practical test. Hearing that he received full marks while fighting Lunia all by himself, everyone started wondering who exactly he was, and even the professors could not believe how a 5th-ranked knight went one-on-one against her. The teacher was also sure that he was definitely the one who attempted to capture the spirit bodies, while Professor Firmic also started thinking how come Corrin was using the same techniques as that person. Then a few days later, Corrin goes to a weaponsmith because even before Lunia gave her that advice, he also understood that he needed a good new weapon. The smither started asking him a lot of questions like who he was, how he knew his family's secret method, and how come the academy provided him such rare ingredients, but he simply tells him he did not need to worry about any of that. To acquire such super expensive ingredients, one needed at least several hundred gold coins, and there were no players willing to pay all in cash. So they created it using ingredients obtained from scenarios or quests. However, he had the special soul dust, a 2nd-rank runestone, a 1st-rank silver stone, and the support of the Academy's chairman himself. What he was making with all these was one of the very few best weapons capable of handling the territory, the legendary rank Shadow Kingdom Silver Knight's Spear, also known as Silver Spear. We then get a flashback from Alicia as she recalled the first time she went out in a real battle. She remembered killing a 5th-rank monster and feeling sick by the scent of blood and seeing intestines spilling out of his body. However, the smell of human blood was different, as there lay a girl in front of her who she had accidentally hit with her sword. Despite it being her first time seeing human blood, she had grasped the intense smell of it instantly, and she was trembling in fear because she was the one who had actually injured that girl and her blood was on her sword. Coming back to the present, she still remembered all that as clear as day, but she shifts her focus to the mission at hand, which was to capture a werewolf for 70 silver coins. It was a relatively easy mission compared to the urgent one she saw this morning, saying that they needed to search for Fog City's murderous vampire, and of course she clearly did not want to do that as she did not like dangerous things. Turns out there was one more reason why she had chosen this mission related to the werewolf. Holding that belt that she got from, she still wanted to find out where her savior was right now. Suddenly, she hears a commotion at the back of the train, and when she turns around, Corrin is also there, and he greets her. The other Guardians' expressions weren't really great towards him because, due to the quota system, the Guardian Association already had to tolerate students being involved, but they clearly did not like the fact that a 5th rank like him was showing up. However, he did not care about that as he was only there for Alicia, and there was also the fact that they would not say anything outwardly to him in front of the Sword Emperor's granddaughter, who he was showing that he was close with. Putting all that aside, he asks her how her eyes were, but she didn't exactly understand what he was saying and tells him her eyes were fine. However, he explains to her that was not what he was talking about, and as she begins to understand, she asks him if he had heard about that from her sister. Of course, he had not heard anything from her, but just to keep it simple, he said yes. He informs her that her sister was very serious about destroying her, so she really needed to hurry, otherwise she would not be able to wield a sword again. She remained silent for a moment and then said to him that maybe she could just stop wielding a sword when that time happens. However, in his mind, he did not think that she would be able to do that. When they arrived at the werewolf nest, there were 2 werewolves and approximately 20 short hounds in that area. The capturing party was able to handle the short hounds, and they even hunted down a werewolf. However, the situation suddenly took a strange turn. A lot of these monsters started coming out of the forest, and a strange fog began to appear. Some of the knights were actually concerned for Corrin's safety, since he was just a 5th rank, but they already had a lot on their plate. Meanwhile, Alicia was taking down all the monsters one by one. However, she also could not understand what was happening, as a mix of ghosts and monsters were appearing in this area, where so many evil spirits were not even supposed to exist. Since places with few humans usually don't attract evil spirits, she began to feel like this must be man-made. Just then, someone comes up behind her and tries to attack her. She manages to block it in time and realizes that it was not a ghost, but a fellow knight. She questions him why he was attacking her, and instructs him to stand back when suddenly, another one comes behind her and strikes her. As the knight got ready to land the final strike, her instincts kick in, and without even realizing it, she swings her sword and cuts down the man into several pieces. As the body lay in front of her, she once again gets reminded of the smell of human blood, that intense smell, which signifies death and a fading life. She stood there in shock as she realized that she just killed a man. While she stayed there frozen, another man tried to once again attack her from behind when suddenly a spear pierced through his skull. Corrin tells her that these were not real people, and confused, she asks what he was talking about. As he takes off the head from the body, he explains to her that these were mere corpses that were raised using black magic. This whole scenario was actually the main event of the opening act of the second part, Fog City's murderous vampire subjugation. Normally, the lunatic serial killer that Marriott fails to catch in the latter half of the first part would start chasing the player's party. However, if the player were to choose this other mission of capturing the werewolf, while playing this mission, they would meet the murderer John Doe, and after fighting him, they would be able to fend off his attack. That's exactly what happens, as suddenly, a mysterious figure appears right in front of them. Alicia gets scared, and he quickly tells her to just prepare to run away. He throws his spear right at it and lands a direct hit, making it get stuck in the tree. The other knights were surprised to see how weak the creature was as it dies in just one single attack. However, Corrin knew that was not it, because if it were to die so easily, there's no way it would be the boss of the opening act. Also, based on John Doe's characteristics, he knew that it would be impossible for him to catch him alone. John finally speaks up and was impressed that they were able to destroy his doll, but he was going to put an end to things now. The main problem while facing John Doe wasn't his strength or something, but his specialty in stealth. Suddenly, bright red smoke started coming out of him, and it was called Crimson Haze. When the health of the undead mage, which was the source of the fog, reaches 0, it triggers a fog of death automatically, and what Corrin had just destroyed was a doll and the device that activates the fog. This monster was an undead using the corpse of a mage. The reason it was hard to capture John was because he uses dolls and avoids tracking, while also using the fog to hide behind it, making it impossible to locate him. As the fog of death starts to spread, everyone starts running away from it, and Alicia asks him if it was okay for him to just leave his spear behind because it was quite expensive. But then he activates the rune of return that he had planted on it, and the spear comes right back to him by itself, showcasing that he could just retrieve it like this. Just then, their comrade Charlie tripped on a root and fell over, while the fog was getting closer to them every second. They quickly try to save him, and Alicia tells him to grab his hand when all of a sudden, a hand comes out from within the fog and captures her. Corrin helps Charlie get back up and instructs him to forget about all this and just get out of the forest. He also borrows his robe and jumps straight into the fog, thinking how come he was stuck in this situation again. In his last life, it was actually him who tripped and got trapped in this fog. He fell into critical condition in not even a minute, but now that he had a regeneration ability, he felt that he would be able to last much longer and stepped into the fog, covering his face with the robe. The problem right now was Alicia, who was stuck inside there. Blood started being drawn from her body, and if that continued, she was not going to last long. Trapped inside the fog, she desperately tried to cut away the hands that were holding her, but nothing seemed to work. She started thinking why, if it had something to do with her strength or if her posture was not good. However, as her consciousness began to fade away, she remembered the words her sister had said to her while looking down on her. Her sword falls down, and she realizes that she was simply too weak. All she wanted was to be cool and save someone as well so that she could become a respectable person in the eyes of the person who saved her life. Just then, she hears Corrin's voice calling out to her, and as she sees his shadow in the fog, she realizes that this was the same voice as the person who she admired. She finally understood that her savior was, in fact, Corrin. He asked her if she was all right, but she starts crying as she could not free herself and she could feel that she was dying. He gives her the cloak and tells her to just calm down. He helps her hold the sword again and says that swinging randomly was not going to work. She just needed to stay calm, focus, and then cut it. He also assures her that he would be protecting her from the undead that were walking towards them, but she needed to do what she could. However, she felt that she could not do it since she was not strong enough and she was dizzy and hurt from the fog as well. But then he tells her she could do it because among all the swordsmen he knew, she possessed a remarkable talent. That's why he was sure she could do it, but only if she decided to do it. He looks her in the eye and says that all she needed to do was just take one step, and that was enough. He quickly runs off to fight the undead monsters while she starts thinking to herself that even she could not last long in there. So how was someone like him with a lower aura rank than her so confident? Seeing that he believed in her so much and said all those things to her, she takes the stance as she had no choice but to do it now. She remembers her grandfather's secret technique, one which was capable of cutting anything, and to wield it, she awakened her eyes of the boundary, a cursed ability that forcefully allowed her to see others' domains. She focuses all her energy to take that one step inside the domain and uses Ardent First Sword style to activate her domain severance. In a split second, she launches a strike so devastating it even slices John Doe, who was hiding all this time. But not only that, she cuts the entire forest in half, lifting up the fog. As the fog vanishes, the other knights are stunned, wondering what just happened, and Corrin explains that the corpse in front of them was John Doe, the murderous vampire from Fog City. But even he and the knights are shocked to see that a human cut an entire forest in half. Corrin could not even begin to comprehend how she already managed to do that, since he had thought she would just use one slice's third form or iron wave. She wasn't supposed to do that yet, while she, on the other hand, was so excited that she was able to pull it off. The other knights start wondering if she's going to be the next heir now, since no one else but the Sword Emperor was able to use domain severance, and they all just start cheering for her, supporting her. Meanwhile, Corrin just stands there thinking, this was not supposed to happen, and why does his plans always get twisted like this? As the news spreads that Alisha defeated John Doe, everyone starts asking the same question. Who is going to be the next heir of the Arden family? Meanwhile, Lunia's 5 swords are getting pissed reading all this news around her while she simply sits there, deep in her thoughts. The Arden family, known for their swordsmanship, operates within the sword faction and moves based on the logic of power. They had been anticipating the swordsman who would succeed the insanely strong head of the family, Garen Arden. Domain severance was a move that existed on the stage of the Heart's Path, which was a realm unknown to most martial artists, and Garen Arden had long awaited someone who could continue his legacy. Lunia had practiced while dripping blood, sweat, and tears, and the scars on her palms were evidence of the life she had lived. However, even she, who was called the genius of her generation, could not satisfy the Sword Emperor. One day she engaged in a friendly duel with her younger sister, who had only just held a sword. She was the illegitimate child whom the head of the family brought from outside. She had never thought of that kid as her competition, but when they were fighting, Alisha suddenly activated her Eye of the Boundary and slashed Lunia. The little girl stood there in shock, seeing all that blood on the floor, and Lunia did not even realize she had already been cut. It wasn't a matter of speed or anything. She had used the profound path of martial arts, the domain, and she took a step within that space. As Lumia lay on the floor, she was frustrated that she got defeated by such a young and lazy child, but when she looked at her, she also got a glimpse of the title that her grandfather had told her about. Even though tears were coming out of Alisha's eyes, she was smiling, and it was the twisted nature that mortals could not understand, a sword demon. Soon after, the head of the family appointed Alisha as the next candidate as well, and that's how she overcame everyone's objections and became Arden's head candidate. Remembering the memory of rubbing the hair of her little half-sister, who grew up under the neglect of her father's family, she felt that it probably remained over there somewhere. Coming back to the present, the 5 swords ask her if she was okay, and she tells them there was no need to worry, as she also wanted her to step into the domain because she had a feeling that if she were to see that move she used as a kid once more, she also might be able to reach there as well. With that in mind, she instructs the girls to start preparing the sword challenge. Later, in the academy, Corrin visits Alisha to see how she was doing, and the doctors had told her she would be good to go in 1 or 2 days. Even though she looked fine, she was still asking for some honey bomb candy from him. He then proceeds to ask her how she managed to use domain severance, because even if she could see domains with her eyes of the boundary, she shouldn't be able to use it immediately. She answers that she was able to do it because he believed in her. Turns out, all she needed to do was just try harder, and comments that she truly was a genius who straight up defies effort. Just then, someone knocks on the door, and it is Mariette, who had come to see if her juniors were okay. As it was their first time meeting each other, the 2 girls introduced themselves to each other. He asks Mariette if she was there to check on Alisha, and she says she was, but then when she sees the 2 of them being a bit too friendly, she starts staring at him, questioning him if they were close with each other. Then all of a sudden, they see someone knocking on the window, and it turns out Horan was hanging there upside down, calling him because she wanted to get the raw fish from before. Even he gets scared looking at her like that, but then he sees Mariette, who was shaking a bit, and he wonders if she still found Horan uncomfortable. However, she questions him if he was eating food with her too, and he is surprised to see that that's what she was worried about. He tells her not to worry and promises that he will prepare a meal with her too, and just like that, she gets all happy again. Suddenly, he realizes that this is actually an unexpected gathering of incredible all-star members who could help him in this story. He informs Alisha that since the rumors of her succeeding domain severance had already spread, Lunia would probably initiate the sword challenge soon, which stresses her out. The sword challenge was a swordsman tradition that was used by 5 master-level swordsmen, and it was meant to test the sword pavilion master who took charge of one faction of the family. However, it's been a long time since Arden's sword challenge had been used to lawfully get rid of competitors. Alisha was certain that if she fought her sister, she would straight up die since she could not even beat the 5 swords. However, Corrin had a method that could help her, but he tells her that he had one condition. That was, from now on, whenever he suggests fighting monsters or training in the training room, she would have to listen to him without complaining. In other words, she will be his fixed party member. Alisha, simply so desperate, agrees and pledges her alliance. So with that out of the way, he officially recruits her into his party. Later at night, one member of the Five Swords is walking through a street when all of a sudden, someone tries to attack her. She questions the person in front of her who she was, and she answers that she was a challenger. She was in fact Horan, and she introduces herself as Alicia Dojo's knife-style master, and then starts attacking her with her knife. She asks why she was acting like this all of a sudden, and Horan says that he had promised her he would buy her sushi if she captured her. Meanwhile, Korin is facing off against another member of the Five Swords, and she also keeps on asking him the same questions. He introduces himself to her as Alicia Dojo's Gwando-style master, and then quickly gets back to attacking her, thinking that it was the simple truth of life, hit before you get hit. And that's exactly what he was doing. We then get introduced to all the members of Alicia Dojo: the Gwando-style master, Korin Losh; knife-style master, Horan; flying sword-style master, Dronzer; Jendal-style master, Mariette Donalev; and finally, the headmaster, Alicia Arden. The five of them utterly defeat the Five Swords. When one of them asks Korin why he was doing all this, he simply laughs and states that they needed to raise their fame so that they could grow a new dojo like theirs. And it works, as the news of the Five Swords getting defeated by a new Arden-style dojo spreads rapidly. According to Arden family rules, there was the Sword Challenge, and it was a sort of test to choose the Pavilion Master, who handles the family's important household matters. But at the same time, it was also a way to crush competitors. That's why Korin wanted to change this whole structure into a dojo challenge. As they defeated the Five Swords one by one in a new martial arts dojo challenge format, their main goal was to set up a one-on-one battle between the two sisters, and that's exactly what they achieved. Alicia knew that if she could win this, all of Lumia's forces wouldn't be able to touch her, and that was why she agreed to start this whole thing. The dojo registration fee, the fee to purchase an abandoned fighting dojo, the fee to hire the mercenary Dron, and everything like that was all taken care of by Mariette, which she was going to repay after she got her reward from the John Doe quest. Lumia then comes up to her, and like always, she looks down on her and says that if she wanted to escape, she should have already run away, because it was clear that this whole dojo challenge was not her idea but Korin's. Meanwhile, he was motivating her from behind, telling her that she should stand for herself, but she was just so scared she started thinking if she could really defeat her. Nonetheless, she formally proposes a friendly duel with her as the new master of Arden Dojo. Lunia gets straight to the point and agrees, but she also warns her that she won't be using practice swords or non-lethal weapons, and Alicia was prepared for that. As the two of them brought out their swords, it was finally time to settle this fight among sisters once and for all. Mariette, watching from afar, also contemplated that even if she were to unleash all of her power after transforming into a vampire, Lunia was an opponent she wasn't sure if she could secure a victory against. She looks at Korin and asks him if he was certain Alicia was ready, but he simply believed in her, that she could handle her own things. Since he felt that way, Mariette trusted him, believing he must be right, and it turns out his credibility rank in Mariette's bank was still maxed out. Before starting, Lunia tosses a sack of coins for what was about to happen, and he tells her that it was a bit too much for a dojo repair fee. However, she responds that it was a reconstruction fee and immediately closes in on Alicia to land a strike. Even though she blocked it, the sheer force of her attack was so much that it straight up sliced the entire dojo behind them in half, leaving both him and Mariette completely stunned. While Alicia tried to hold on, she recalled how she used to admire Lunia when her passion for swords was still burning. She was just like a hero to her, from a story that her grandpa used to tell. Compared to her, she saw herself as just a daughter of a concubine who died giving birth to her, and her father saw her as a shameful reminder of his mistake. One day, when she went up to her to congratulate her for finishing the mission, Lunia patted her on the head and said to her that she had gotten quite tall, which made her really happy. However, on the day when she first cut a human, her own idol, everything in her life completely changed. As we come back to the present, Lunia prepares to attack her again while Alicia strategically moves one step back and then deflects it to the side. As she tries to launch a counterattack, thinking that her sister wouldn't be expecting tricky irregular guards like this, Lunia quickly strikes her once again and pushes her back, mocking her that her footwork was still as sloppy as ever. Since that did not work out, she decides to use her speed to confuse her line of vision. As she does that, using the advanced forward third form, Lightning, she appears right behind her and tries to attack her, but Lunia already saw her and launches an upward slice. Alicia manages to dodge it just in time, and then, instead of using her sword, she tries to attack with her body by tackling her straight on. Yet again, Lunia frees herself from her and just gets even more angry as she kicks her right in the face. Questioning her if she really thought she could beat her with such tricks, she swings her sword at her, and Alicia blocks it with hers. Seeing everything was going as Korin said to her, she quickly launches a counter-combo strike, which even though Lunia easily blocks, she was a little impressed, as things weren't being too easy. But still, her opponent was inexperienced, and she kicked her back once again. She then leaps into the air to attack her, and just like that, the two of them continue to keep exchanging blows. Slowly, Alicia was catching up to her, but not only that, Lunia also noticed that she was now seeing the domain with those eyes of hers. Since things had already reached that stage, she also wanted to see the true self that Alicia had been hiding despite all her talent, as she continued to keep on pressurizing her. Alicia was running out of breath, but then she got back up and looked more focused and calm than ever. Lunia knew that she had realized victory wasn't 10 steps away, but just 1 step away, and so she decides to respond equally as well by preparing herself to unleash her territory cut, while Alicia also does the same to use her domain. The two of them charge right at each other, and Lunia thinks back to how her little sister had been chasing after her, wanting to become a cool swordsman like her.